Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to call this meeting of the Executive Committee to order. This is a special meeting of the Executive Committee to consider the 2019 budgets. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. People can watch us on YouTube at Toronto City Council Live or follow the meeting on your computer, tablet, or smartphone at www.toronto.ca/council. And I would welcome the members of the public who are here with us today to observe our deliberations. As people will know, just for those who may be watching online and those who are in the room, there are no deputations received at this meeting because we had a series of public meetings out across the city, which I was able to attend two of, and there were members of the Budget Committee, of course, at all of them, at which there were many deputations received about the budget, and I thank all of those who took part in those public meetings as part of the budget process, and thank people who are here to show their interest today. As a first order of business, may I ask if there are any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and if so, please indicate the item number and the nature of the interest. And just as you do that, I want to take a moment to remind you that when you declare an interest now under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, you are now also required to file a written declaration with the clerk. The clerk has provided blank forms to every member's office, and I ask that you complete and bring them with you to the meetings each time you declare an interest. If you forgot to bring your form on this occasion, the clerk staff can provide you with one, and ideally you would submit that before the end of the meeting. So and if you need more information on the obligations that we all have under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, I refer you to the Integrity Commissioner's Interpretation Bulletin. I think the clerk has copies of that as well. And if you require advice, you can, of course, reach out to the Integrity Commissioner directly. Now, are there declarations of interest? Councillor Pasternak.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Out of an abundance of caution, I'll declare interest on capital and operating for Toronto Public Library. I must admit, I'm sort of looking for the item number here, as my spouse, is, although on leave, has left the library years ago.
I think the clerk says it's 2.5.
Is still
item 2.5. I think the clerk says it's 2.5.
Okay, I'm trying to finish the. Okay, good. We're good.
Thank you. Other declarations? I have four. They're all related to one another. And it's, again, out of an abundance of caution, but I would like to declare an interest because of my involvement with the Rogers Family Trusts. Rogers Communications, Inc. provides telephone and cellular services, wireless devices, internet and Wi-Fi services, and television services to the City of Toronto. And the interest is in item 2.2, the water and wastewater consumption rates and service fees. It is in respect of 2.3, the same interest because of the provision of some of these services through the budgets of 2.2 and 2.3 are water and solid waste. 2.4, the rate-supported budget for the Toronto Parking Authority, and 2.5, the capital and operating budget for the City of Toronto itself. And so I'll register those interests, and we'll file the appropriate forms with the clerk at the appropriate time. There's going to be one minor change to those. Any other declarations of interest today? All right. We have 6 items. The first item is EX 2.1, the 2019 property tax rates and related matters. I would like to move the recommendations of the Budget Committee on this item and staff recommendations in EX 2.1A, the impact of the 2018 Creative Co-location Facilities Property Tax Subclass and 2019 implementation. Are all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. The next item is EX 2.2, the rate-supported budgets, 2019 water and waste consumption rates and service fees. I would like to move the Budget Committee's recommendations on the item. And since I've declared an interest in part of this item, I'll ask the Deputy Mayor to take the chair for just a moment to deal with the votes on the separate parts of that.
All those in favor? Sorry.
Should be a recorded vote.
The motion, adoption of the item as it pertains to funds allocated to the provision of telephone, wireless, internet, and television services. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried.
It's a recorded vote.
Oh, a recorded vote. I didn't know that, sorry. Recorded vote. Councillor Thompson? In favor, Councillor Pasternak, Councillor Nunziata, Deputy Mayor Min Wong, Councillor Crawford, and Councillor Bailao, all in favor. All right?
Thank you. We now, pardon me? Oh, the balance of the item as
amended?
Balance of the item. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. That brings us then to EX 2.3, 2019 rate-supported budget, solid waste management services, and recommended 2019 solid wastewater. Councillor Crawford, I believe you have a motion on this item.
Yes, I do. That City Council direct the City Manager Solid Waste Management Services to provide each council the opportunity to host a second Community Environment Day to be funded using existing resources. Number 2, recommendation 14 be deleted and the following new recommendation be adopted. City Council direct that the confidential attachment to 2019 staff recommended operating and capital budget notes, solid waste management services remain confidential until the outcome of the City Council's decision has been communicated to unions and affected staff.
All right. Councillor Crawford has moved the motion before you. All in favor? I'm sorry? All right. Questions of the mover, please. Councillor Deputy Mayor Bailao.
So when you say a second Community Environment Day to be funded within existing resources, what was proposed in the budget?
Yes, so the solid waste came to us during the budget committee meetings and did state that they'll be able to find, what's important with this is if councillors want a second Environment Day, that they'd be able to find it within resources. They've gone out and actually asked most of the councillors whether or not they want that, and they feel that they can provide it within the existing resources.
So thank you through you, Mr. Mayor. If I don't wish to have a secondary Environment Day, and I get that, but could I use the process and have just composting, for example? And what would be equivalent in terms of the cost of hosting the additional Environment Day? Do I get that option and flexibility?
Yes, I think you do. Again, Councillor, not forget the numbers of to do 2 Environment Days for everybody. There was an X cost. I just can't remember the cost right now, but and this is with compost. We do provide through our own individual budgets. We do pay if you want to do more than the one, but staff are confident that they can find that. If you want a second Environment Day, there should be no problem with continuing on as you always have been.
Okay, thank you.
Is there are there any further questions of the mover? Okay. In that case, then I will ask to call the question on that. All those in favor of the motion moved by Councillor Crawford? Opposed? Carried. Now, I will again ask the Deputy Mayor to take the chair as I have an interest in a part of this item before we consider this item as a whole.
The motion's on the screen. Do you need to record it? All those in favor? Recorded vote. Councillor Thompson, Councillor Pasternak, Councillor Nunziata, Deputy Mayor Min Wong, Councillor Crawford, Deputy Mayor Bailao, Councillor Ainsley. That carries.
All right. Now we are going to deal with the balance of the item and ask for all those in favor of the item as a whole. Balance of it. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We now move to EX 2.4, the 2019 rate-supported budgets for the Toronto Parking Authority. Councillor Crawford, I believe you wish to move the recommendations of the Budget Committee on this item and the recommendations of staff in EX 2.4A, the bike share program financial considerations.
Yes, and I won't, that's 2 pages. I won't read all of it. I think this is, again, recommendations from Parking Authority to consider the bike share program as a part of our network within, or their network within the Parking Authority.
All right. I will again ask the Deputy Mayor to take the chair momentarily as I have an interest as declared in a part of this item.
Okay. Has everyone read the motion? All those in favor, recorded vote. Councillor Thompson, Councillor Pasternak, Councillor Nunziata, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Bailao, Councillor Ainsley. All those opposed? Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong.
And on the balance of the item, I'll call the question on that. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. I will also be moving adoption of item EX 2.6, additional City of Toronto reporting requirement as a result of Ontario Regulation 286/09, budget matters, expenses. Is that, that's in front of you, obviously, at item 2.6. I'll call the question on that. If there's no other questions or comments, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. So that leaves us with the one last item, the obviously larger item of the day. That is EX 2.5, the 2019 capital and operating budgets. And we will have a presentation from our city manager and deputy city manager and chief financial officer on the capital and operating budgets. And may I just say while they make their way to the to the table, as I said to the media this morning, this is now my fifth budget as mayor, and I will just say, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of Budget Chief Gary Crawford and all the members of this committee and all the members of council and the staff and the public, to say to our staff, thank you for what's an extraordinary amount of work. I don't know if the public realize that more pressure is placed on the staff in a year in which there's been an election, because the councillors, probably to their everlasting happiness, are not here for a large part of the time in the fall when the budget is actually, staff budget is being put together. And it just really compresses then the time we have in the new year to do the work that culminates in today's meeting and the City Council meeting later this week. And so I just want to say thank you to Heather, who's most recently joined us, to Josie, of course, who's been at this for a long time and does a splendid job and has even been known to be out in the community briefing the public on the budget. And I thank you for that too, because I think it's very, very important. And of course, to another fairly recent arrival, our city manager, who has headed up the entire process. But through you, to all the people involved, I just want to say thank you, for getting us to this stage today where we can deliberate as an executive committee and then as a council on the budget. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, members of the committee and members of council. I'm going to kick off the presentation. It's going to be a very high-level presentation, followed by Heather, who's going to drill down a bit more into the details as it relates to the operating and rate matters, and then Josie's going to wrap it up with a presentation on the capital. So if I can, I just want to say this is in fact my 10th budget as a city manager, obviously 9 with my former municipality and my first with the City of Toronto. And Mr. Mayor, I can only echo what you said. I mean, it's the result of all the men and women in this room that we are here today in the position that we're in and able to present to you a balanced budget. So very proud of that. And so without any further ado, if we could go to the next slide. I usually start budget presentations with this slide, and it's there to kind of set the context for everything that we're doing here today and what we'll do on Thursday in front of council. And that is to explain the relationship between our citizens and business owners in this community, you, our leadership, and of course the public service that delivers the 150 services plus that we provide each and every day. So the relationship between our citizens and our council, our citizens have aspirations. They communicate that oftentimes during elections, but of course on a day-to-day basis they will communicate to you what it is that's working and what isn't. You in return provide leadership. And in between those two relationships, one of making sure that we're doing what we're supposed to do in the leadership, there is a vision that you provide for the city to follow, and certainly we'll be doing that this term of council. And then, of course, there's a relationship between city council and the public service. And so you give us direction, we manage the direction that you're providing us, and between those two items, we develop a strategy for making sure that each day, each week, month, and year that we are focused on the things we need to be focused on. And then lastly, there's that relationship between our citizens who provide us money, whether it be through property taxes or fees that they provide for services that we give them. They bottom line expect in return for the services that we provide them, they expect value. And one of the things that I did hear from you, certainly members of the Budget Committee, was a need to focus on performance. How do we demonstrate that, in fact, they are getting value for the money that they give us? And so that's something that I know is inherent in this budget process. It certainly is identified in the documentation that you have. And I'll just say this, as the chair of the Municipal Benchmarking Network of Canada, which I've been now for a few years, I pay particular interest in the way in which we spend money. And so I think it's important for you to know that is maybe a professional and a passion of mine, that we are very good at being able to demonstrate that the money we receive, that the services provided in return are done well. And so that's something I'll be committing to you as the city manager. And of course, all of this, years ago, the question was asked of the Conference Board of Canada, you know, if the public sector, or private sector, sorry, is about earning profit, what is the public sector all about? What is it that we're attempting to earn when we provide the services that we provide? And the bottom line is trust and confidence. Everything we do each day, each month, each year, we're here to make sure that when we provide services, we do it in a manner in which people can have trust and confidence in the way in which we're doing it. Next slide. This is an important point I think I can't stress enough. There are 2.9 million people that each and every night when they go to sleep that they call Toronto home. During the day, however, certainly most business days, that number grows to 3.1 million. So what that tells you is that Toronto is part of a very important economic hub where there are more people coming in than are leaving. And so, yes, the difference between the 2.9 and 3.1 is 200,000 people that are coming in from the 905 region. But I would tell you that there are probably even more than 200,000 that are coming to Toronto each and every day, usually for work or for other reasons. And so that's a number I think we need to keep in mind, because it does serve to prove the point that we are an important aspect of a very large economic region. And that community of ours is going to grow over the next 20 years to 3.8 million people. And so that about 1 million additional people that are going to be living here is an important number. It's reflected in our land use plans. It's reflected in our infrastructure planning. But I also want to point out something that is important to understand, that growth within the Greater Toronto-Hamilton area is not just occurring in Toronto, obviously. It's actually extending westward through Peel, through Halton into Hamilton, and that you can see a tremendous amount of population employment growth is going to occur in those areas. Yes, it's going to occur in York, and yes, it's going to occur in Durham, but the shift is really from Toronto westwardly when you go look at those numbers. And I say all of this because we live in an incredibly important, and I say important to the country, to the province, economic region. And so this economic region is going to extend from just over 6 million people to over 9 million people in the next 20 years. And so I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, and I'll end with this point. When you look at Census Metropolitan Toronto information, you will find that the GDP of this region is approximate to Alberta and approximate to Quebec. Now, I'm not suggesting in any way, shape, or form we should be separating or anything of that nature, but I just simply want to point out the fact that Toronto is an incredibly important part of the Southern Ontario economy. It's an incredibly important part of the provincial economy and certainly the federal government. So think of the income tax, think of the sales tax, think of all the revenues that our upper levels of government rely on. A lot of that is coming from this part of Ontario. Next slide. So of course, as coming new to this community and getting involved day one with the budget, the first thing I do, recognizing that all of you are going on the campaign trail shortly after, is to look at what council focused on the last 4 years, to get an idea of what the themes were, and to get an idea of what was the, if you will, the tenor of those budgets over the last term of council. Because that, short of having an explicit mandate given to me in terms of what to focus on, I used that information and working with staff to get a sense of what was important to you and what kind of fiscal strategy were you using in the last term of council. So that certainly has shaped the way in which this budget has been developed. So clearly the themes that you were focused on were housing for a whole variety of reasons. dealing with everything from those that are homeless, in terms of those that are having difficulty affording housing. That was certainly a priority of yours. Mobility, I use that term only to include everything from walking to cycling to transit. And there's no doubt that transit is an incredibly important focus of ours right now, and as was last term. People in neighborhoods that we're seeing challenges that are being expressed through people's day-to-day lives, and as they struggle to make ends meet. And so you had very many strategies last term of council that were earmarked at addressing that, everything from social procurement to community benefits and other good programs that you're investing in. Modernization is a term that all municipalities around the globe are embracing as we use technology, but also look at ways in which we deliver services to find efficient ways of doing that. And of course, financial health. And I know my predecessor in 2017 developed a report that spoke to the need for council to look at the situation that it faces each and every budget in terms of how it is that we're going to pay for all the important services that we provide. And so that's what you focused on, and if we can, we'll go to the next slide. I look at all of this, and I mean, Toronto, I will say this, I think people that live in this community realize when they step back that there's probably no other place you would rather live in the world than Toronto and this Southern Ontario economy, which we all enjoy. But that said, there are still significant challenges that you're facing. And I think it's important when we think about this budget, we put it in a particular context. So with that, I start with social inequity. I think you know this. Our middle class is shrinking. We're finding more and more people that are experiencing challenges in our neighborhoods. We're looking at the nature of employment. It's becoming more precarious, meaning that full-time employment with benefits and pensions is not the norm anymore. We have an aging population, which all of you know in the next 10 or 15 years, we're going to have many more people who are going to be retired, some of which will have the money to retire, many won't. And so all of that presents a number of challenges. And as we know, crime statistics are moving up, and that's another area of focus that we can't ignore. Climate change, there's not much question. It's getting wet. It's getting wild, and it's getting difficult for us to always try to mitigate the consequences of climate change. I don't think there's any debate that it's happening. And so the good news is that we will be bringing a resiliency strategy to you in the second quarter that speaks to what ourselves and 99 other major communities around the world are doing to address resiliency. Aging infrastructure, an organization as big as this, it stands the reason that there are going to be challenges with all the things that we look after. And I'll say this, I think Rick Leary, when he presented about 2 months ago a report that spoke to the state of good repair for all of that is owned and operated by the TTC, was an important report for us to take into serious consideration. As you well know, all in that the Transit Commission is got a challenge over the next 15 years to address about $33 billion in assets that it will need to maintain in order to ensure that we keep moving people in this community between their homes and where they work. So I think that's an important fact. I think the other thing I want to say to you is that even though I know Rick's number is about 500% bigger than it was the last time I think they had presented on this topic, I look at the state of our asset management work, and I will say that I believe there's probably some further effort that needs to be made by the City of Toronto in order to really capture what is in fact our challenge when it comes to an aging infrastructure. So when I look at that, I think about, yes, we have about a $41 billion capital program for the next 10 years. I know without TTC added to that, we have about a $12 billion challenge below the line. And if I add TTC in, it balloons to $29 billion. And I'm saying all of this only to say to you that my suspicion tells me that our aging infrastructure is probably an even more challenging number than the $29 billion that's in front of us. Housing, I don't need to say too much about that, except all of you know what it is that you've been doing over the last term and will continue to do this term in addressing what is a very expensive housing market. And then, of course, trying to make sure that we have affordable housing and looking at rental opportunities in particular And of course, as you well know, one of the first things that we did was the Housing Now program, which will avail 11 sites for us to be able to try and generate larger sums of rental housing to people that need it. Mobility, we've talked about. There's no question that, with Toronto growing, by 1 million people over the next 20 years, there's a need to ensure that there's a significant investment in transit. But I will say this as well, that the challenge that we're going to face is not unlike New York and Boston and Chicago, where trying to maintain your existing transit system is not going to be an easy feat either, and that I'm sure will create some delays and some problems for citizens of this community and beyond. And then, of course, financial sustainability, which is a report that we'll be bringing back certainly later this year as to what some of the options are moving ahead. I'm going to talk more about that in a few minutes. Next slide. So here we go. This is the numbers that we presented certainly to the Budget Committee. And I do want to point out, as I did 2 weeks ago, that there is an asterisk, and I'll explain that in a minute. But our operating and rate-supported budget is $13.47 billion, and our 10-year capital tax and rate-supported budget is $40.67 billion. And so with that, if I can, the next slide. Getting there, if we start with the operating tax and rate-supported budget, what is the challenge always is year after year, and Toronto's no different than many other municipalities I know across this country. I mean, we try to look at what it is that we do and manage it as effectively as we can. And so, and I do say this a great amount of pride that the men and women in this room worked hard to bring city operations in at 1.1% increase over 2018. How that happens, and I've seen it directly, and it happened, of course, here. We are bent on continuous improvement. We do look at ways in which that we can deliver our services so as it doesn't cost as much as it did maybe the year before. This is not an easy thing that we do, and we look at all lines in our budget to make sure that we're managing them as effectively as we can. So we started with a 1.1, and even of the 1.1, a lot of that focus was in the service area that we call social and community services. So we're certainly investing, I believe, in the people of this community in appropriate ways. TTC and police, the increase over 2018 is 3%, and you well know that the police held the line for a number of years, and so we did, in fact, understand why it is that the increase was higher than it was in 2018 and 2017. And TTC, again, an organization that has its challenges maintaining its current operations, requires significant investment, and so I think we understand why those two together came in at about 3%. And of course, all other agencies effectively followed the lead of the city operations and came in at 1.1. Next slide. So that isn't to say that this budget doesn't have, important investments. And of course, just broadly speaking, what we continued to invest in 2019 and is found in this budget are matters related to poverty reduction and well-being, city building and mobility, environmental sustainability, and modernizing government. So the figures you can see there, they're further broken down in all the detail sheets that you have as part of our budget submission. Next item. So how it is then we balance, and I'm going to draw attention to the asterisks here in a moment, but we operated on the basis of a residential property tax should be pegged to inflation, and so so about a 2.55% figure was what we had turned our eyes to. And of course, overall, because when we talk about property tax, it isn't just the residential property tax that we focus on. We obviously look at commercial, industrial, office, and so it's a blended tax that we have, and overall it's at 1.8%. Water rate increase 3%, which is a far cry from the years which this committee and this council dealt with 9% increases over 9 years, so that certainly is an improvement. Not to say that there still aren't important investments that need to be made. Similarly with solid waste, the rate increase is 2.2%. TTC fare increase of 10 cents per ride was approved by the board. And then, of course, to the asterisks that we have, the federal government refugee contribution. So I did have a chance to meet with the Deputy Minister last week to find out where we're at with respect to the ask that the City of Toronto is making to the federal government. So Deputy Minister Morgan and I met to go over the matter with her and, of course, reiterated the fact, and we've put in writing to them what our challenge is in terms of the 2019 budget. She, of course, did not come attending that meeting with a check. I'd be a little surprised if she did. She said that this is a matter that is being discussed politically between the minister, the premier, and I know our mayor have been talking about this. And so one thing I think is important, that there was a clear recognition from the deputy minister that this is a new normal. As we've been talking about for the last couple of years, we've seen the numbers rise, and they're not falling back. And so the question is, as it was last year, we did receive almost $25 million from the federal government, recognizing that we are dealing with a refugee issue that has grown. We fully expect that there will be compensation that is going to be provided to the City of Toronto. Ideally, we would like to have this as continuous. These one-off investments in the city's program are certainly appreciated, but we would like to have sustainable funding for what is, and they recognize and we recognize is, as I say, a new normal. So that's important. The other thing I want to point out is the solid waste rebate. I must admit, as the city manager in Hamilton, when I saw that solid waste was deemed to be a utility here in Toronto, I was rather envious, to be quite honest, that there was a municipality that would have the courage to do such a thing. Admittedly, I was a little surprised that there was a rebate provided as well, and so we are looking at how it is that we can start to address the rebate that I think have been provided for the last 8 or 9 years. So there is a reduction in rebate of $35 million. Being proposed. And now the next point I want to point out is the capital contribution number. You see it here as $13 million. I think if you were here 2 weeks ago, you would have saw that number as $46 million. I want to point out something I think is quite important. When we had, as you well know, the land transfer tax has always been a source of revenue that has grown steadily since it was approved over the last almost 10 years. We had used the land transfer tax as a way in which to kind of build up our capital contribution or current from capital contribution. We had saw in 2018 that on our graph, if you will, or that dollar amount was no longer continuing to rise. In fact, we saw it start to drop, which of course created some concern for all of us because it has been a tremendous revenue source. We were taking money from that land transfer tax benefit, and we were taking some of that money, and each and every year for the last, I think, 9 years, we had increased our contribution by about 10%. So what we're saying this year is that rather than continue to increase the contribution from MLTT to this matter, that we are basically just holding or staying that contribution, which is about a $35 million figure. And so if you look at where we were 2 weeks ago, the $46 million was really made up of $35 million as that 10% contribution that we normally would make, as well as a direct taking from that dollar amount, which 2 weeks ago was $11 million. Now, some decisions were made by the Budget Committee to increase that $11 million to $13 million, which we can get into in a few minutes in other presentations here. But I just want to make a very important distinction that what we're doing is we're staying the investment that had been made in previous years of this $35 million figure. And that's why I'm not showing this as a $48 million matter. So hopefully that's clear to everyone. And then to the last point, a savings target. Having been here now 6 months, I did have an opportunity to look at the way in which the organization is run. My question always is, it begins with vacancies. I think we have to look at how vacancies are managed, as well as look at how we deal with contract work, how we deal with investments that we're making in modernizing our organization. And so when I look at all these variables that are at play, and the other one as well is, ways in which we can better align services, I thought, conservatively speaking, to be very direct, a $10 million target is more than reasonable for us to be able to achieve. And so this is not, to me, going to be a one-year sort of approach. I want to look, and I know there was some direction provided to the previous city manager by council to look at the non-union rank and file as to see whether or not savings could be achieved. And so I think what we have here is a savings target that I met with, as you would expect, Josie, Heather, the other day to go through some details as to how it can be achieved. And so I can say with confidence that we should be able to achieve $10 million in the 2019 budget with reasonable effort. So with that, I'd like to go to the next slide. So of course, from a capital standpoint, our 10-year capital program, we are going to be investing over that period of time almost $41 billion. And so, important that people don't get a sense that the capital from current is going to result in any kind of reduction in the amount of work we're going to be in 2019. I can say to you that we are not reducing the amount of work that we're going to do in 2019. That in fact we're going to continue to make strategic investments, and I've identified a number of the areas that are important to our capital program. I'm not going to read each one of them off, but what I've highlighted to you on this slide is about $1 billion of investment that is going to occur in 2019. Next slide. So as you know, there was a number of meetings with throughout the City of Toronto where we had about 170 people actually provide deputations to committee, as well as we had almost 1,000 submissions that came in. Now that's not including emails and letters that were sent to you. These are ones that came in through clerks. And so this is just a very simple tool that we have that based on what we receive from people and their concerns, what we heard and what they provide in writing, it gives you a sense of some of the major issues. So the words that are slightly larger text are ones that seem to come up more often, and the ones that are smaller in text less often. So it just gives us a sense of what are people talking about and how does that relate to the budget that's in front of you. I know there was on our website almost 10,000 hits on our tax information, which is good that people here are engaged and they're wanting to know how it is or what it is that we're spending money on. So I think all of that bodes well for the city. But this gives you some sense of some of the topics that seem to be resonating with people. And so from that, if we go to the next slide, through Budget Committee's work and the questions of staff, there was a number of changes that they proposed. And so additional support in 2019 has been added to the Housing Now program, along with student nutrition, youth employment, arts and culture, and other matters that were raised. So that does provide for some change to the budget we had submitted. And then, of course, savings in 2019, so adjustments to the capital from current, which in this case I think was in the order of about $1.5 million, which was earmarked for arts and culture and some other effort. But as well, we have we've had that offset in savings as well. Next slide. So I don't expect you to read this all right now, except what it is. It's a quote that I've taken from FCM, which is going to the federal government. As you well know, the federal government is going to be releasing its budget March 19th. FCM has been listening, obviously, to the municipalities across this country, and it's focusing on a bit of a change in the way in which we view the relationship between the federal and municipal government. This is basically speaking to the need for there to be a different relationship, a new fiscal relationship that empowers municipalities with the tools to tackle a broad array of locally defined priorities. And so recognizes that we deal with transit individually, we deal with housing individually, we deal with a whole host of issues that aren't going away. In fact, when I came here, I couldn't help but think, having been the city manager in Hamilton, we experienced a lot of things that obviously you did. I mean, the downloading of housing has been significant, especially when it comes to trying to maintain that housing stock. each and every year and not lose sight of the fact that, you know, that investment is critical to the people that live in our social housing. I also know that pooling, I think, ended last year, so it used to be a $140 million revenue source, but that has changed. As well as I know in transit, years ago in the mid-90s that there was provincial support for capital and transit as well as operating, and that has changed. And so I can appreciate that the federal and provincial government has its challenges to deliver service it's responsible for, but it just seems that the municipalities in general, I know Toronto in particular, the pressure is only going in one direction. And so when I look at that, and of course I look at the fact that we have a couple of 400 series highways which were effectively downloaded to you in the form of the Don Valley and the Gardiner, and I think about the Gardiner and how it is consuming about 53% of your state of good repair transportation budget, which although it only represents 1.32% of your lane kilometers in the city, it does beg the question, if we weren't looking after that, what other roads could we look after as well? So all of this to say that I know we have special legislation that allows us to access revenue tools that we can use to try and deal with the pressures that we're experiencing. But I would say FCM is right in its message to the federal government that maybe it's time that we start to think about how our relationship can better work. Next item. And so with this is a summation of the work that the former city manager generated. So these are the 5 areas of focus in terms of a roadmap to long-term finance sustainability. So better information supports strategic decision-making. Of course, multi-year budgets is really becoming the norm for a lot of municipalities across the country. Enterprise risk management, I kind of talked about that moments ago when I spoke about TTC. And to find that we now have a $33 billion challenge, and I would maintain that we better make sure that we're aware of the other infrastructure challenges that we're dealing and make sure that we have a mature asset management program. So enterprise risk management is a fundamental requirement of any city manager to make sure that where we're exposed, we're aware of it and we have strategies to deal with it. Improving value for money, of course, that is all about performance measurement. That is all about making sure that that we are able to demonstrate to people that we are spending their money wisely. Secure, adequate, and fair revenues. Of course, MLTT, the fact that it is no longer rising and it seemed to have dropped in 2018. And the good news on that, and we just got some information recently, is that I think there was a question raised by committee as to whether or not it was going to further drop in 2019, and so we have some evidence to say that that in fact isn't happening, and so we are reasonable in assuming that MLTT would be approximately the same in 2019, and we can certainly talk to that. We need to look at user fees and the ability to pay, and we ought to consider all revenue options in terms of ways in which to pay for the many services we provide. And then, of course, improving focus on financial balance sheet and health. So setting goals and annual reporting on financial health. I think we got a very positive bit of news the other day about our credit rating. I mean, we still are a very strong municipality when it comes to the management of financial information. But, I look at reserves and the way in which our reserves are at right now and wanting to make sure that, they continue to be healthy and we invest in them, I think is going to be important. And then, of course, better integration with provincial, federal policies and fiscal direction. So, I mean, it is about a dialogue with the federal and provincial government about how it is that this economic region that we're in, of which Toronto clearly is the hub, what is the strategy ultimately to make sure that we continue to be successful? What is the investment strategy as it relates to transit, to housing? Because to me, housing is not strictly a municipal thing. It's more of a regional matter. And that transit investments, I think, are going to be key. And so it concerns me, and I'm sure it concerns you, that over the last many years that the funding investment or the financial investment in cities like Toronto are very much kind of program-based, and I worry that they become a little bit too piecemeal and that they're not aligned to the core needs of this community. So that's a conversation that I know the staff is looking forward to working with the mayor and council on, is how it is that we can certainly improve our future revenue sources and make them more consistent. And so with that, I'm now going to turn the microphone over to Heather, and Heather's going to drill down a bit more detail as to the operating and rate-related budget.
All right, thank you, Chris. I'd also like to thank the Budget Chair and the Budget Committee and the staff across all divisions. As mentioned by the Mayor and as mentioned by the City Manager, thanks doesn't seem to happen enough, and City staff across all areas and at all levels have helped compile the budget that we're about to present. So I just wanted to say thank you to not only the staff of the City, but also our agencies. The 2019 budget has evolved and has been developed on a set of assumptions. These assumptions are influenced by priorities that have been set not only by Council, but by the public service and what we've learned from the public. As mentioned, we also have introduced the staff recommended budget that was approved by the Budget Committee, but it's based on 5 guiding principles. The first guiding principle is that all programs and agencies have adopted equity-based and equity-focused budgeting. Consideration has been given to the potential equity impacts of new and enhanced programs and investments included, and they are included in each of the program and agency notes. Going forward in the future, staff will be looking at equity impacts in greater detail. A second principle is, due to the election and in the absence of a council direction, we adopted the principle of introducing a cost of living property tax increase, which is consistent with what the City of Toronto has done over the last 4 years. The third principle is that the budget was created with the goal of preserving the existing service levels. The fourth principle is that the budget was to reflect the continued investment of decisions that were made by the Council in 2018. And lastly, the City takes Auditor General recommendations seriously, and we have linked program savings and reflected them in the individual program notes. Our efforts are to assist the citizens and community to better understand where their money is being spent. So our operating budget. Our operating and tax rate budget is $13.47 billion. This is a key document that outlines how much money the City will bring in and how much money will be spent in 2019 to deliver on legislative programs, critical services, and council-approved strategies. In years post an election, the City combines both its tax and rate budgets together. The tax-supported operating budget is $11.59 billion. I'm going to speak to more of this in a moment. The rate-supported operating budget is $1.9 billion. They are fully funded by user fees. For our key rate-supported budgets, I'd like to discuss the rates. Water, we have a 3% increase. Water has been set up as a fully supported utility, and the 9% over 9 years, as the City Manager mentioned, are behind us. This year, we are proposing a 3% increase for 2019, which is aligned with prior year's council approvals. This will generate $1.33 billion. For the average Toronto household using 240 cubic meters of water, this will result in an annual increase of $27. The projected daily cost is $2.58, and a projected total annual cost is $940. Our solid waste rate is 2.2%, but that is based on a blended rate increase. Solid waste management services is a rate-based program where residents pay fees for services they receive based on the size of their garbage bin. The volume rate-based structure was designed to encourage residents to divert as much of their waste as possible away from landfill. Residents with the largest garbage bins pay the most, and those with the smallest pay the least. A 2.2% blended rate increase is expected to generate $10.8 million, and it will be retroactive to January 1st. A blended rate means that the rate increases vary based on a customer group. For multi-residential properties, which includes apartment buildings and condos, we have a recommended rate increase of 1%. For single-family residential and residential units above commercial properties, we have a recommendation of 2% increase. Non-residential customers include industrial, commercial, and institutional properties, schools, as well as city division agencies and corporations, have a recommended increase of 5.2%. Differential rates per customer will allow for full cost recovery by customer type, which will result in greater financial sustainability. Solid waste requires a multi-year rate strategy to fund its long-term waste facility needs, similar to what water did successfully in 2006. This slide is actually going to represent where does the money come from for the city and where does the money get spent. So you can see on the left, the primary source of revenue comes from property tax. For 2019, the property tax revenues will total $4.3 billion. It reflects a residential property tax increase of 2.55%. The cost of living increase results in additional $138 million, including assessment growth of $61 million. The next highest funding source is other levels of government. Federal and provincial funding comprises 22.7% of the overall city revenue. This reflects grants and subsidies of $2.6 billion. Funding is received to help offset legislated programs such as social assistance, childcare, public health, social housing, just to name a few. 99.9% of this funding is already based on signed agreements. The city has requested $45 million in federal funding to offset shelter costs for refugee and asylum seekers, and the continuation of federal funding of $8 million for social housing. In addition, it includes a request of $10 million in funding from the province to assist in policing effectiveness and modernization. The TTC is the third source of revenue. As the city manager mentioned, approved by the TTC board is a 10-cent fare increase. This will generate additional fare revenue of $25.6 million. The fare revenue will be offsetting the operating costs of the 2-hour time-based transfers and increased capacity to relieve overcrowding. Fares received by the TTC fund approximately 62% of their operating costs. Other sources of revenue include supplementary taxation and transfers from Toronto Parking. MLTT. So this totals over $700 million, representing 6% of the city's revenues. And as mentioned by the city manager, MLTT is not a predictable source of revenue, as it is directly correlated to the real estate market in both volume and house prices. So now I'd like to look at the right-hand side of this slide. Where does the money go? You'll see that the bulk of our spending is actually on costs shared in social programs. This includes children's services, where Toronto's licensed childcare system includes approximately 72,000 spaces from children from 0 to 12 years. In the long-term care homes and emergency services, the scope of services provided includes 10 long-term care facilities, as well as our police force, fire services, and paramedics. Corporate and capital financing includes our capital from current contributions and our debt service charges. We are planning to issue $950 million in new debt in 2019, and as a result, the total net balance will be $5.59 billion by the end of 2019. I'm going to skip to new and continuing investments. So as mentioned, as one of the guiding principles, we focused on preserving decisions and strategies that had been implemented and approved by Council in 2018. This year's budget reflects $317 million in funding for programs reflecting those strategies. Strategies that were commenced in 2018 have now been included as part of the city's base budget. Major themes for these strategies are in the area of poverty reduction and well-being, $187.6 million. In the childcare realm, $73.5 million is invested to represent 210 subsidies. In the shelter cost area, $45 million represents adding 4 additional shelter sites, which is meeting the target of 11 sites, and to provide 24/7 respite care. In the transit fare equity, Phase 1 was introduced in 2018, where transit access was provided to clients on ODSP and OW. In 2019, we're introducing Phase 2, which will provide the subsidy to clients on childcare, on the childcare subsidy list. We also have $4.2 million invested in supporting vulnerable youth. We have $2.6 million invested in the Toronto Youth Equity Strategy. This includes youth development programs, youth violence intervention, and alternatives to criminalization. In addition, we also have the costs related to enforcement of the new cannabis laws, and we have earmarked $3.8 million for the enforcement officers. In the area of city building and mobility, we have $70.9 million, which includes additional TTC operators to address volume increases while complying with the Employees Standards Act. That totals $27.2 million. We also have the cost of 2-hour transfers, which is just over $20 million. We have Presto Transition, which is $18.5 million. And we also have investments from 2018 to relieve bus overcrowding, totaling $13.5 million. Environmental sustainability has earmarked $12.2 million, which includes Transform TO investments, which will be for the ongoing work for community energy planning and low carbon thermal works, and the expansion of tree care and maintenance of approximately $5 million. Modernizing city government for more effective and efficient ways to serve Torontonians, we have earmarked $3.6 million. And this will involve funding for service reviews that touch a number of areas, including cybersecurity awareness, studying for offset printing, switching to direct purchasing of light vehicles, to name a few. Now, the city manager spoke a few minutes ago about how did we get to a balanced budget. We've identified strategies. We've identified strategies that include a residential property tax increase of 2.55%, a water rate increase of 3%, a solid waste rate increase of 2.2%, the TTC fare increase of 10 cents per ride, the federal government refugee contribution of $45 million, the solid waste rebate reduction of $35 million, the capital contribution reduction from 2018 of $13 million, and a savings target of 10. I'm going to go into detail for a few of them. But as the city manager identified, we'd like to provide additional clarity on the capital from current amount. As we present this year's budget in the context of changes from 2018, there is a reduction of $13 million. When we walk you through the capital budget, we'll further elaborate on the $35 million difference in the capital plan. When we were going through the budget process, the budget committee did make some minor adjustments. And this slide is a listing of the various investments that support initiatives that the budget committee approved. We have $1.5 million earmarked for arts and culture, $300,000 for the expansion of student nutrition programs in independent schools. We have $300,000 for the Scarborough Work Youth Employment Plan, $150,000 for positions to support the Toronto Police Services Board governance, $120,000 for installation of menstrual hygiene product dispensers in shelters and respite centers, and $20,000 for increased Muslim Fellowship Program grants. The offsets to these investments come from two areas. One of them is reversing the accountability office's service enhancement requests that were $610,000, and then a reduced capital from current contribution of $1.4 million. Now I want to elaborate on a few of the items that helped us balance. So as mentioned, we have included $45 million from the federal government to offset the costs for the shelter program. The city has experienced a year-over-year increase of 100% in refugee accommodation. The City of Toronto continues to request that the federal and provincial governments establish an effective regional strategy for Ontario that would help intergovernment collaboration and help Toronto manage the increased volume. The city continues to see an average of 18 to 20 new refugee and asylum claimants arrive into the shelter system on a daily basis. Starting in 2019, to offset the costs of the city, we are responding to the needs of the refugee and asylum claimants. The city has requested ongoing and stable funding of $45 million from the federal government. This assumption is included in the budget since we have received funding of $26 million from the feds in 2018 and $3 million from the province. The federal government has also acknowledged the pressure the refugee accommodation cost has placed onto the city. With regards to municipal land transfer tax, in prior years there have been discussions surrounding the unpredictability of MLTT revenue and the reliance on funding the valued operating expenses for the city. As the actual revenue continued to exceed expectations in the prior years, it enabled the city to not only absorb the rising costs, but allowed to expand services to meet diverse demands. The use of a revenue source that's dependent on external factors beyond the city's control, such as consumer behavior in the real estate market, presents a considerable level of risk to providing consistent service. In 2018, we experienced a reduction of $83 million over 2017. The experience in 2019 thus far has been consistent with what we saw in 2018 January and February months. We do need a strategy to wean MLTT funding from funding city operations to funding capital projects. There will always be a portion of municipal land transfer tax that is reliable. Anything beyond that can be dedicated to building capital infrastructure. So as mentioned, in 2019, we have reduced our annual capital from current contribution by $13 million. And as the city manager mentioned, we have also paused any additional increases from the capital from current contribution to the capital plan. Having reviewed our historical spending rates in the capital budget, we've identified that our capital plan, as mentioned at the beginning of this process, is an area of improvement. The 2018 capital spend was 67% across all capital projects. As directed by the Budget Committee, we will endeavor to reassess the capital plan based on evidence such as historical spending. We are developing an asset management strategy, and we will examine our capital project management, our capacity, and the industry capacity to improve our planning and spend rates on a go-forward basis. The long-term waste strategy. So Council adopted the city's long-term waste management strategy in 2016, which recommended that solid waste management services become a fully self-sufficient and sustainable utility. This strategy from 2016 also set a goal of diverting 70% of Toronto's waste away from landfill by 2026. In 2017, the residential diversion rate was 53%. Most solid waste management services, single, family, and multi-residential ratepayers currently receive a rebate or credit on each utility bill funded from the property tax base. The budget recommends that the solid waste rebate for single, family, and multi-residential be completely phased out over 4 years. The proposed reductions to the single-family residential rebate in 2019 will provide $35 million to the property tax budget and help achieve the city's diversion targets. The volume-based rate structure is intended to provide an incentive for residents to reduce their waste and divert more away from landfill. Once the rebate is phased out, those who produce more garbage will pay more, and those who produce less will pay less. We need to move towards finding a way to incent to throw out less garbage to help achieve diversion targets. Move to a model where you truly pay for what you throw out while making solid waste a true utility rate program based on a user pay model. To minimize the impacts of reductions to the solid waste rebate on low-income ratepayers, Solid Waste Management Services is recommending single-family residential low-income relief program, which will be incorporated into the existing water rebate program. The city's long-term waste management strategy recommends that solid waste management services become a self-sufficient and sustainable utility. Phasing out the rebate will support the transition to a model whereby operating expenses are fully covered and revenues and property tax subsidies are no longer part of the financial model. Single-family residential large garbage bin rebates will be phased out in 2019. The medium garbage bin rebate will be phased out over a 2-year period. Small garbage bin rebates will be phased out over a 3-year period. The multi-residential rebate will be phased out over 3 years, beginning in 2020. It will not be reduced in 2019 to allow for the implementation of a program of a proposed multi-residential mandatory diversion program. Phasing out the rebate does not change the principles behind the volume-based rate structure. Even when the rebate is completely phased out, the small garbage bin will still be more than $200 less expensive than an extra large bin on an annual basis. So this next slide, in actual fact, shows how the 2019 combined tax supported programs is $138 million more than last year. This budget has been built by preserving service levels experienced in 2018 and continuing to invest in the strategies approved in 2018. The budget is balanced by $61 million in assessment growth and $77 million from a blended tax rate increase. Previously mentioned is 2.55% on the residential residents, which is a blended rate of 1.8%. This slide is reflecting a service delivery cost increase of 1.9%. Both Toronto Police and TTC boards approved budgets 3% over 2018. City operation budgets are 1.1% over 2018. The debt charges comply with the city's policy of maintaining a debt servicing ratio where the debt service costs that it pays does not exceed 15% of the total property taxes that it receives. This is part of the budget that we use to calculate the recommended property tax increase. Now the net budget is in an everyday context. The average tax bill in 2019 will be $3,020, an increase of $104 annually. From this slide, you will see that 2/3 of your tax bill is dedicated to keeping the city safe, keeping the city moving, and investing in building, maintaining, and enhancing the city's infrastructure. The residential tax rate increase is a cost of living increase of 2.55%. The commercial tax rate increase is 1.28%, which continues the policy of increases equal to 50% of the residential tax rate. Multi-residential tax remains the same level as 2018, which also continues the policy of freezing tax rates. And a 0.85% increase for industrial, increasing by 1/3 compared to the residential increase. Okay, so the purpose of this slide is to show you what we've talked about so far, which is the increase in tax rates to support the 2019 budget levy. What these stacked bars represent is on the residential side, you'll see that on top of the 2.55% impact for the entire residential class, there is also a 0.5% city building fund levy that started in 2017. This levy was to fund priority transit and housing capital projects as approved by City Council. Council approved this dedicated tax beginning in 2017 for 5 years to create $1 billion in debt room for additional investment opportunities. The current value assessment impact is where the properties values are reassessed on a 4-year cycle, with the CVA increases being phased in. So next we have the city's capital budget and plan. This $40.7 billion plan, 10-year capital plan, will guide decisions on what investments will be made to purchase, build, and repair the city's infrastructure. The Budget Committee has provided direction to reassess the 10-year capital budget and plan and develop strategies to increase funding for the capital budget that include developing an approach to reduce the city's reliance on MLTT revenue for operating expenses and redirect MLTT funds to capital projects. A review of the 10-year capital plan cash flows. We will look at project timelines with consideration for historical spending rates, the city's capacity to deliver projects, the industry's capacity to deliver projects, and what will be able for the city to absorb a temporary contribution from capital adjustment for 2019. The Budget Committee has also directed the CFO and Treasurer to increase funding for the capital budget by developing strategies to maximize the use of development charges, reinvest the sale of city assets, partner with provincial and federal governments, and the private sector. And as required by the provincial legislation, the city will also update asset management policies, standards, and practices, and report back with an asset management policy for council approval in July 2019. With more accurate information, the city will be in a better position to address funding requirements for maintenance, service improvement, and growth. The intention is to build greater agility and flexibility in the capital plan. And now I'll pass it over to Josie Levita, the Executive Director of Financial Planning, who will walk us through the capital budget and plan.
Thank you, Heather. Good morning, everyone. Mayor Tory, members of the committee, and visiting councillors. I'm just going to give you a top-line overview of what Budget Committee has recommended as part of our 10-year plan for this year. This plan, of course, as you know, funds our current assets valued at about $94 billion and also helps us plan for our future assets so we can support service delivery into the future. Okay, so as I think everyone has heard already, the 10-year capital plan for both tax and rate is almost $41 billion. The rate programs, which you have already recommended approval at $14.4 billion, the tax at $26 billion. And I just wanted to note that in the Toronto Water area for 2019, the budget that was recommended is actually a doubling of what we saw last year. So it's increasing from $800 million to $1.6 billion as we continue those investments. Next slide. So now I just wanted to take a moment to give you a sense of what those rate programs were. Of course, that $14.4 billion that was part of the rate is the rate capital plan. It's all fully funded by user fees. I think we're one of the few municipalities that actually has a full rates supported budget, no debt incurred as a result of these programs, with $13.5 billion of that amount going to Toronto Water. So what this slide does is just shows you by our project categories where the funding is going over the 10-year period, with state of good repair, the second to your left chart or bar, being our state of good repair of $7 billion, and that the lion's share, of course, is Toronto Water. But the service improvement area is also quite significant at $4.5 billion. So in that particular amount, just want to highlight for you that what you did recommend was $3 billion in Toronto Water that deals with basement flooding and our wet weather flow program, plus another $1 billion to start investing in our Don River and Central Waterfront trunk and sewer outfall. And then finally, the Toronto Parking Authority amount in there for bike share expansion is $12.5 million, and the report you just recommended helps its self-sufficiency. Next slide. So focusing in on our tax capital plan, it's $26 billion. 70%, or about $18 billion, is all being dedicated to our mobility program. That includes, of course, our transit expansion, our regular TTC base state of good repair program, and transportation services. And of course, built into those amounts is funding for our smart track stations in Eglinton West, our Scarborough extension, some accelerated work for the relief line, but also some planning for the waterfront LRT and the closeout of our Toronto York extension. When we look just to the left a little bit in terms of some of the other key programs, I just want to highlight for Parks, Forestry, and Recreation, the capital plan there includes about $500 million to deal with the Master's Facilities Plan. It's the growth component of the plan, supported by development charges, so that's been built into there. And shelter support and housing includes the funding to continue acquiring new shelters to implement our 1,000 beds that Council approved last year, the work on the George Street revitalization, and of course our 19 funding to the Toronto Community Housing Corporation for both their state of good repair and to continue in-flight revitalization projects. When you look at the right side just for a moment, our capital from current and debt, that represents about 39% of our total funding, or roughly about $10 billion. Provincial and federal funding combined is about $8.3 billion, or 32%. And there's just over $1 billion in there from our provincial gas tax funding, as well as some federal gas tax funding that essentially is funding our TTC. On the recoverable debt, which is the second last line or bar there, that's $2 billion. That, in fact, is the City Building Fund funding that Heather had just identified that we are using to repay the debt for our Smart Track investments. Next slide. So this 10-year capital plan is similar to what we had approved, Council approved in the 18 to 27 capital plan, and with a few adjustments for timing, of course, and other things that may have been slightly amended from plan. But what we do also have is $785 million in new capital investments. This was a result of our ability to look at what we call smoothing as a term, but essentially realigning our cash flows to better reflect our capital project timelines and activities, so that created some debt room. And what we did do was look at our unmet needs, and based on this level of funding, the capacity that we did had brought in only the most critical things that we could. So of course the Relief Line acceleration project, of which 50% is being funded by the city and 50% by the provincial government, was added. Our colleagues in transportation has done some work on bridge rehabilitation, and we brought in some funds to deal with the most critical bridges over the next 3 years. We've added a few bus purchases, and we're dealing with a combination of planning on some of our key public spaces, our modernization program, some emergency facilities, and ensuring that we continue to make sure the funds are in place so that the city is AOTA compliant. And finally, dealing with the lake effect damage and windstorm damage that we experienced a few years ago. Okay, next slide. So what this table does takes across by year the estimates for each of the project categories and total by year of the 10-year capital plan. So let me just draw your attention to 2019, which is on the left-hand side. If you look at that number, the $2.9 billion, that is the one-year capital budget that's being recommended for approval. When we add another $1 billion in carry-forward funding, i.e. monies from prior year projects that are unspent, that takes us up to about $4 billion. When we look to the right-hand side of this table, what we have circled there is 48, or almost 49%, or $12.8 billion, a loan being directed to state of good repair. That is our priority. When you add really the other areas, health and safety and legislative, because they're just different types of state of good repair work, it's almost at 55%. So we took that number and looked back at the 2011 to 2020 capital plan. In fact, the entire capital plan that was approved by council at that time was $12.8 billion, and coincidentally, that is the same amount that we're recommending just for state of good repair this year. And finally, when you combine the service improvement and growth-related projects, they represent about just over almost $12 billion, or 45%. So what you're seeing over the 10-year period is really almost a balance between ensuring that we're taking care of the current assets that we have today with planning for the future assets based on the growth and service demands that Chris highlighted for you earlier on. Next slide. So with aging infrastructure being a challenge at the city, it's now again worth about $94 billion. We annually track what's the impact that our state of good repair funding is having on that backlog number. So annually, what we do is we ask all divisions to identify, based on their asset management plans, what is the amount of funding that you do need that you're not getting? So if I needed $100 and we were only able to spend 80, that $20 that we are not spending gets attributed to the backlog. And so when you look overall at the city from a tax and rate perspective, what the red line is showing, which is the actual, the absolute value of that backlog, it is rising from about 7.8 billion to 9.5 billion. But from a percentage of asset value, it's pretty, the green line, it's pretty consistent. So it looks like we're we're constraining it, we're maintaining it, we're managing it overall. When you take away two key investments that council has recommended and that's been built into this capital plan, one being the Toronto Water component, which is essentially the whole state of good repair program that is to eliminate its backlog, and our investment on the Gardiner. You see that line becoming quite steep. In fact, it's steeper than 2018, and that's for a few reasons. We have now included some updated information. All our staff are updating the condition of their assets. And so we see significant increases, particularly in places like transportation, but also our shelter support and housing and some of our other programs. This is part of the maturing that people are doing in terms of understanding their asset inventory and the condition of it. But we've also added our Toronto Community Housing backlog numbers that we've not had before. So this is the first year that we've actually had those numbers in there. So let's see what's driving this in particular. So next slide. So I won't go through them all, but essentially you see all the little red arrows on the right-hand side. Transportation, bridges is driving that, but so are major and local roads. TTC, this number does not include the information that was provided to the Commission around the current asset condition. I think we've all heard about the $33 billion number. When you take away the 10-year capital plan value that's being recommended, it's actually about 24 billion over 15 years. So we're going to be working with the TTC to understand that number better and to understand the priorities and timing. With Toronto Public Library, we've had an eye on that one for the last few years. We were able to give them about $5 million more, not a lot, but that came from our added capacity. And on the TCHC number, I just want to be crystal clear what that number is telling everyone. That is the value of the state of good to repair backlog from year 1 to year 10 in the absence of any additional funding coming forward beyond 2019. So there is a 10-year capital plan of identified numbers that we're looking at, and we'll be working with them in time for the 2020 budget process. What is that regular rate of state of good repair that's required? It's about $160 million per year. And there's an additional amount to keep them kind of leveled off. And we are, in fact, we've asked federal funds for that. And so we're working on that. And we'll be coming back in 2020 on that. So turning to our funding sources, we've talked a lot about this, but I think the key again over the 10-year period, when you're looking down the right side, is that we have done everything in our power to maximize our funding sources. And when you compare, again, those two bar charts, one on the left and one on the right, back to 2011, you know, our contributions from our federal and provincial partners was 23% or $3 billion then, and that's increased to almost $8.5 billion or 31%. So a lot of that reflects the partnership we have both on our base capital program for TTC as well as in-transit expansion. Next slide. So having said all that, one of the key indicators for the city, as you all know, is our debt service ratio that we have tried to maintain to 15%, now averaged over the 10 years. So this 10-year capital plan has a debt service ratio of 14.93%. That's made possible because, as you can see, in 2019 and then again in 27 and 28, that they're actually well below the 15% average. We have peaks in the middle in 2021 and 2023 that take us close to the 16%. So that was our way to be able to balance that. So as we move into the following few years, we'll have to keep a close eye on that as 19 falls off and what we can do when we add a new 10th year. Finally. So when we look at what we have funded, we also know that we have things that aren't funded. And so that list of unmet capital needs is growing, and this slide gives you some sense of the kinds of things that are in that. We did do a briefing note to the Budget Committee. We were asked to identify the unmet needs, and what we said was that over the first 10 years, that's about $12 billion, requiring $8.4 billion in debt. And if you look at projects that were in the 10 years that complete themselves in the following 5 years, then that number grows to $13.5 billion, or $8.6 billion for debt. But what it doesn't include in that number is the transit expansion funding, for which there's a report coming forward in April that will be identifying what those numbers are, so that we'll give a better sense of that. It does not include any additional items that we know have been identified through secondary master service plans, so funding for TO Core, Midtown, those are all things that are still in play. It does not include any emerging citywide or local priorities, for which I know many councillors and others are looking in their neighborhoods to see what kind of revitalizations can help. And finally, it does not include any projects that we are aware of beyond the 10-year period, and that's part of our need to continue to look beyond the 10-year forecasted period. So having said all that, then we need to actually look at some funding strategies and get this number better understood. So when we were at Budget Committee, based on all this information, we did identify a series of actions that we felt were required. Let me put them all up at the same time. We've talked about these. So, you know, we will be reassessing our 10-year capital plan based on our capacity to deliver. We've done that for the last 3 years. But as the city matures its capital project delivery and understands better the condition of their assets, we hope to bring those numbers more in line with what's being spent, because what we are seeing still is an average spending rate that is still below 70% at the city. And when those funds are committed to and not being spent, there are other projects that could otherwise have been funded, and or we will need to recalibrate based on the CFC adjustments as well. We are maturing our asset management practice along with that, and so that will also help to support it. But I think the next 2 key points are critical. We need to bring together what we call our official planning, or land use planning, along with our service and master planning and our capital planning, so we can actually understand on a continuum basis what's first, second, and third. So we can set those priorities and then have a funding strategy to support that. And in fact, the Budget Committee has made this recommendation, as was noted, and we will be coming back starting with the 2020 budget process to do that. So just to wrap up then, we are on the second last step of this budget process today, and we'll be seeing all of you again on Thursday to finalize this budget. And then finally, as Chris noted, that we have our budget website that continues to be updated. It did receive 10,000 hits so far in this cycle since we launched January 28th. So I'm hoping that it is helping to not just engage the public, but also help inform you as you go to council. So thank you very much. This concludes our presentation, Mayor Tory.
That's the conclusion. Well, thank you very much to all 3 of you for a very complete presentation, and in thanking you and the city staff generally and the public for their input into the budget. I failed to mention 2 other people who should be mentioned who toil away on this virtually year-round, and that's Gail Ross, who works for Councillor Crawford, and Sophia Arvanitis, who works in the mayor's office, and they are certainly a part of this, I'm sure, occasionally an irritation, but nonetheless very diligent in what they do to make sure we can get to today and have a budget to consider here. So I think that would then bring us to members of the City Council who are here with us today, who are not members of the Executive Committee, who would have, I'm sure, some questions of staff, and we'll start with Councillor Cressy and then go to Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll begin with questions to Chris Brillinger from STFA. In July of 2018, Council endorsed the Immediate Steps to Reduce Gun Violence Plan, which we were assured the federal government would be providing funding for. The plan was for 6 grant applications for $32 million. How much did we receive from the federal government?
A 5-year contract for $6.8 million.
So of our Immediate Steps to Reduce Gun Violence plan, that outstanding funds minus the 6, so $26.2 million we have not received. Have we had any indication from the federal government that we will be receiving that by Thursday when we endorse the budget?
No, we have, at the staff level, we have not.
Okay. One of the unfunded applications that we had endorsed for the plan was the community safety and well-being expansion. That is the expansion of the focus tables as well as the community crisis response program.
That's correct.
How much money would it be required in 2019 to have an expansion of focus tables in place for this summer?
Within the recommended budget, we can expand by 1. The plan was to expand by 3 to fund the additional 2 would be approximately $200,000.
$200,000, okay. And to the city manager, in the budget in front of us, we have $45 million that we have included in here that we have said we expect the feds to fund for shelters. Why have we not included $26 million that we expect the feds to fund for gun violence?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe that the recommendations from Council from July include the funds in here at a gross level, 0 net, subject to federal funding.
They don't. We just heard from Chris Brillinger that our plan for gun violence was for 3 focus table expansion, but the budget in front of us only includes 1, for example. We just heard that. And so the question is, we said we need $45 million from the feds for shelters, and we've included that money in the budget even though it is not being provided. Why have we not included the $26 million for gun violence in the budget, given that we were previously told the feds would be providing it?
So I don't think there's a particularly good answer to that question, to be honest with you. I think that again, our commitments with upper levels of government, are routinely communicated. We expect, working through our counterparts, that we're going to be informed as to what is happening and isn't happening. So in terms of, being assured that we're going to get the $27 million for the 2019 program, you've heard from staff, we don't have that assurance at this moment in time.
Do we have the assurance on shelters that we're going to get the $45 million?
So similar to the 2018 budget, we did receive almost $25 million. As I think the Deputy Minister indicated to me, that this is a political decision. She couldn't confirm one way or another last week whether or not that in fact is going to happen. We have, though, reason to believe, based on past practice, that they will come through with money. $25 million was provided in 2018. Short of just automatically putting it on the tax base, I think it is worthwhile to see whether or not they are going to fulfill their commitment. There is recognition, as I said, I think in my presentation, that this is the new norm. If in the event they don't come through, then we would have to come to committee at some point and identify a funding source if need be. If they don't come through, but rather than simply starting to tax people for something that could very well be resolved in the next several weeks or months, we have made it a very clear ask of the federal government for them to provide the money, which we believe, and they acknowledge certainly on staff to staff, that is a new norm that we all have to address.
Okay. And with my remaining 30 seconds to Shelter Support and Housing Administration, from a previous briefing note, I understand that in 2019, we will be building in this city just under 100 new supportive housing units. Is that correct?
Through the chair, that's correct, 83.
83 supportive housing units. Housing allowances, as it relates to ending chronic homelessness, for $1 million, how many people how many households would receive housing allowances on an annual basis to exit homelessness?
Final question.
If we took an average of $375, because the housing allowances range between $250 and $500, it would be just over 200.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Cressy. Councillor Carroll.
Thank you. If I can go back to the city manager's presentation, the pro forma on page 23. So what is now what is the percentage reduction for capital from current? Yes, we had a policy commitment to 10%. So if that slide is now $13 million, where did the $33 million go?
Let me just turn on my mic, sorry. My understanding is that each and every year for the past approximately 10 years, we have taken funds from our land transfer tax and have added about a 10% increase each and every year to that account. And so in light of the fact that we've had our land transfer tax no longer continue to move in a positive direction, in fact go in a negative direction, we are staying the investment of $35 million that we would have put in if we had seen a more positive outcome on LTT. So we are effectively, and I want to be very clear as to why there's a change in that number, and so that's the reason. So it's not necessarily, I wouldn't characterize it as a reduction. I would characterize it as a staying of an investment that has been made each and every year for the last 10 years.
So if I could, but as much as you don't want to characterize it as that, we had a launch in which it was made clear to us at that time it was page 46, I think, no, page 15, that we were reducing capital from current contributions as a whole in our budget from 10%, which is our policy, that every division and agency commit 10%, that we were reducing it by $46 million, and that would mean a 7% CFC. Where did the $33 million go? Between $46 million and $13 million, we now have a pro forma that calls it $13 million. And granted, this isn't technically a pro forma because it doesn't come to a total at the end. It just tells us how we balance. Where did the $33 million go? So
I'm going to let Josie start. I'm happy to finish and answer your question.
I think if we had the percentage, it would be clearer to me.
So through you, Mr. Chair, the budget-to-budget reduction is 12.5 or $13 million. It represents a 3.6% reduction budget-to-budget. The reference that was made in the launch, $46 million, took that value, which was actually about $11 million at the time, and took the value of the foregone 10% increase that we had planned. So when you take those two amounts together, we had a budget pressure that we had to close. And so that dollar value that was identified at that point referenced how much that of the budget pressure got closed by the CFC. But budget to budget, it's a $12.5 million cut. Reduction?
Budget to budget in cash. But is it still our policy that we should be contributing 10% of whatever we decide is this year's budget to CFC? And are we now making that a 7%?
So through you, Mr. Chair, on the operating side, what we're doing is foregoing the 10% increase. On the capital side, it has not had an impact because we just have not added as much money back in.
So I'll add one other question for the CFO. In slide, hold on a second, I gotta flip the page here. You mentioned in looking at, I think it's slide 28, the $138 million overall is the increase in the budget. And you mentioned so there is an overall increase in the budget of I think you said $138 million, but I wasn't clear because it didn't really match up with the slide. You said that represented service level improvements. And I just wonder what those service level improvements are, because in my review of the budget, I went looking for service level decreases, and I didn't see any. Our matrix still points to we have a commitment, and we have policy service level improvements or standards, but I don't know that any of them improved. Did we set new standards anywhere?
Through the chair.
Yep.
In the initial guiding principles, I commented on the budget being prepared, preserving the prior year's service levels. The investments that were included in the budget that led to the overall increases were based on preserving those service levels, not increasing the service levels.
There are no improvements in service. Okay, thank you.
Other members of City Council who are here with us, not members of the Executive Committee, wishing to ask questions? Okay, I thought maybe.
Yes, thank you very much.
Right.
But I have questions of the accountability officers, specifically the lobbyist registrar, the ombudsman, and the integrity commissioner. If we could, I'm not sure where they're going to sit, though. Was it supposed to be questions of just presenters? I inquired, and the answer I got questions of staff in general.
Questions of staff, so it's anybody.
This is the whack.
Yep.
This is the shot. If I could, I realize I'm down 40 seconds into, so I could either ask for very quick answers.
What I'll do, I'll just start it over again. There you go.
You'll add an extra 40 seconds?
Oh, I just started you over again. Now
Thank you.
You've just spent 5 seconds asking me.
Thank you very much. This question is about what happened at Budget Committee in the last budget wrap-up. There were recommended changes made to the budget that involved a decrease in the Integrity Commissioner's Office budget, the Ombudsman's budget, and the Office of the Registrar. I'm wondering if you could just help us understand better what those reductions in your budget will actually mean, in your proposed budget.
I'll speak briefly to leave time for my colleagues. So for the Integrity Commissioner's budget, the reversal was for a recommended enhancement that is necessary to provide my office with a contingency fund to be able to respond to high volume and complex advice requests and investigation requests. And this is, it is connected to the new duties that the office received effective on Friday, March 1st, to provide statutory advice under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act and to receive complaints.
So is this advice from whom? You're giving advice to whom?
To members of council and to the local members of local boards. So there are about 1,000 members of local boards in Toronto. And that is, so the stakeholder group of my office has not changed by the council change.
So we're seeking advice as to the interpretation of the Conflict of Interest Act, for instance, and this would impact your ability to give that advice?
Yes.
And to investigate any issues that might exist or come to your attention?
Yes, and again, it's a contingency fund. I'm not recommending additional permanent resources because I think every year will be different. Some cases there'll be more requests for advice, more investigations. Some are more complex, some are less complex. So this way we'll be able to respond, which is necessary for my office to maintain independent from City Council.
Thank you very much. So the $170,000 for the two positions in the Ombudsman's office. What will that look like in your ability to perform your duties?
Yes, as you know, through you, Mr. Mayor, the Ombudsman's office is an independent office that impartially investigates the public's complaints and concerns about city services and administration. And our work resolves individual problems. We show city staff what's required in treating people fairly, and also our work leads directly to broad systemic improvements in how the public service treats people. We have seen a dramatic increase in the number of complaints, and we can only expect that to continue, especially as the size of council has gotten smaller, so therefore there is less councillor time to go around to address complaints. And also, of course, as the city and the city government has become larger and more complex, so have the complaints. So I recommended a very modest budget enhancement of $167,000 to fund two much-needed staff positions. One for a complaints analyst. Those are the people who do intake and triage of complaints and early resolution. And the second staff position that we require urgently is another investigator to simply handle the cases. This is not about growing the office. This is about simply keeping up with the intense pressure. And without those increases, we won't be able to continue to meet the service levels of responding quickly, to undertake broad systemic inquiries, or to do proactive work.
So you're the office of last resort for me when we can't get a resolution for an issue or people have a complaint. And you're telling me that without you, you're getting an increase in the number of calls, and you're not going to be able to perform these duties appropriately if we don't address your budget issues.
We're the office of last resort for the public. And many times, councillors and the mayor's staff do contact us when they have not been able to resolve an issue. Without the increase, we are unable to keep up with the volume.
And finally, to the lobbyist registrar, I'm finding there's a lot more individuals trying to lobby me now that the ward's this much bigger, and our portfolios of legislative duties are quite a bit larger as well. Can you tell us what this enhanced funding would have provided, the recommended enhanced funding that's being removed?
Thank you for your question, Councillor, through you, Mr. Mayor. What is at risk is compliance, which means a reduction in transparency. The public is the beneficiary of the disclosure that happens on our registry. Likewise, our ability to deliver transparency and accountability in terms of the conversations you all have with your stakeholders is something the public will lose out on. When our office is unable to meet its mandate, it's a reflection of a delivery of accountability and transparency that city cannot provide.
And if I may, as one last question, did any of you know about the proposed change before the last budget wrap-up? Did anyone speak to you about that?
No.
Okay,
No.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Layton. I'm sure you would want to, in the interest of accurate information being on the record, to not suggest there had been a reduction in these budgets overall, but rather each and every one of them has had an increase in the numbers we have in front of us.
I do believe I said the decrease.
Right at the beginning. I don't think you did. You said during the piece of it, but in any event, the record will show.
But it was a reduction in the proposed budgets that were presented.
Yes, that's true. Thank you. Other members of City Council who are, I don't see anybody that had their hand up to, beg your pardon? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, indeed. Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chair. My questions are about Transform TO, so I think we might need to switch back. Apologies, I didn't get that in time. Thank you. At the budget deputations, we had a lot of people that came in to speak to the importance of Transform TO and how Toronto can be a leader in this area. So I just had a few questions about that. So I was wondering if you could just summarize how your budget will be increasing this year, how many more staff are coming on board, and what will this bring you to by the end of the year?
Through the chair, the 2019 budget will see an addition of 5 additional staff over what we had last year. And we're suggesting a further 5 in 2020.
Okay. And in your opinion, is Transform TO delayed?
Well, yeah, slightly. The 2018 budget from this year called for an addition of 10 staff this year. We're asking for 5 this year and 5 next year. So obviously with the deferral of 5, there'll be a short-term adjustment, but at the end of the day, keeping in mind that Transform TO goes out to 2050, we think we are in good shape.
And are we on track in terms of our greenhouse gas emissions?
Absolutely. We issued a press release 2 weeks ago that showed that relative to 1990, our greenhouse gas reductions are 33% below that level. Our 2020 target is a 30% reduction.
And do you feel that the plan you've put forward is both ambitious and achievable?
Yes, on both accounts.
And can you just speak finally to, in addition to the funds that are coming from the city, what sorts of private sector partnerships are in place or looking to be developed through Transform TO?
In 2018, we established a partnership with Council's approval with Enwave to co-develop, to co-finance low-carbon thermal energy networks. So we are right now on our way to designing and building the city's first net zero community. The co-investment with Enwave is one of those. We have, as another example, we have a project that we're doing down on the waterfront. It's a $2.5 million program down at the Waterfront Center. Of that, we've received funding of about $850,000 towards that. So we are actively soliciting third-party financing for a lot of projects that we do. We're also finding that outside of the work that we are doing ourselves, that the reach of Transform TO has been very broad. We're finding that developers on their own are doing a lot of Transform TO work on our behalf. So the federal government, for example, are redesigning, retrofitting a building up at Yonge and St. Clair to a net zero standard on their own. Enwave, outside of the agreement we have, are designing the well, which is Spadina and Front Street, to Transform TO standards. Creative Energy out of Vancouver is doing the same thing with the Honest Ed building buildings at Bathurst and Bloor. So there's a lot of work being done.
But there's still potential for more, it sounds like, going forward.
Huge potential.
Okay. And how are you planning to interface with the resiliency strategy that will be developed and will be released sometime this year?
We are working very closely with the Resilience Office. We always have. If you go back to the genesis of the Resilience Office, it was our division that put the application forward. So clearly, resilience and the Transform TO work programs are related. One of the ways we kind of look at it is that Transform TO is more engaged in mitigation, which can be described as our impact on the environment, whereas the Resilience Office deals more with that adaptation, which is dealing with the impact of the environment on us.
So we're covering both adaptation and mitigation through these two.
Absolutely.
And when Transform TO is fully funded through this budget process, will you be on track to meet our goals for greenhouse gas emission reductions?
The answer is yes, but to be honest, we are bringing forward a report in Q2 where we will define in greater detail where we are on our Transform TO program, and I think that's where to look for a better answer to that question.
And do you have flexibility that if international agreements change, that we'll be able to incorporate that into our plan? Like, is there flexibility for incorporating a more ambitious reduction, for example?
Final question.
Yes, I think we would need to do that. But in order to do it, the plan that we're working on now is based on the direction we have from Council, which is an 80% reduction. So to create a program or a plan for a more ambitious target, we would have to go back and do further research and analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McKelvey. Other members of Council with us today who are not members of the Executive Committee wishing to ask questions of staff? Does that include Councillor Prusa? You're okay? Okay. Do I see anybody else in the room? All right. Well, in that case, I'm ready to go to members of the committee wishing to ask questions, and we'll start with Councillor Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question through the city manager. Is this budget balanced? I'm hearing a lot of criticism over the last number of weeks that we don't have a balanced budget. We have a number of assumptions. $45 million from the federal government. We have $10 million that you're supposed to find. The TTC is supposed to find some money. So can you just comment on whether this is a balanced budget?
Through the mayor, the short answer to your question is yes, it's a balanced budget. As you point out, budgets are really kind of projections of services that you're going to be providing. If I take, for example, refugees, we're assuming that roughly 18 refugees per day are coming into the city seeking our support. So that's assuming 18 continue to the balance of the year, then we will have this $45 million pressure that we're looking at. So rather than simply put it on the tax base, we are very clearly putting an ask out to the federal government to compensate us for a problem that they recognize is, as I said earlier, a new norm. If for whatever reason we don't receive any funds from the federal government, we will come back with a report to you identifying an appropriate reserve that we could tackle that would be able to pay for whatever the offset or shortfall that the federal government doesn't pay for.
So in essence, budgets and all budgets are primarily assumptions, predictions on numbers that you're going to be anticipating in the following year.
Through the Mayor, that's correct.
Yeah. With regard to services, and I know it was in your presentation, but can you just reiterate again that there are no service cuts contained in this budget?
Through the Mayor, I mean, our goal very clearly was to maintain service levels from 2018. I mean, there are some very modest increases that is related to some of the funding items that we identified, but by and large, our goal was to try and maintain what you had last year.
And then with regard to a lot of the strategic directions, poverty reduction, transform TEO, our youth equity strategy, we are now going into 2019 and poverty reduction 2.0. We're now starting to, we've achieved a lot of the strategic directions we want to achieve. Now we're looking at that kind of next direction or next area to go. Is that correct?
Through the Mayor, that's correct.
Okay. With regard to the CFCs, now there was, you've mentioned that there is a suspension or a certain percentage suspension of a reduction that are going to the CFCs. But again, I want to be very clear because there's a lot of criticism out there over the last couple of weeks that there's going to be projects cut, that we're not going to be filling our potholes. Can you be very clear that in using the CFC reduction of the contribution, there will be no impact to any programs, no impact to really anything at all moving forward in 2019.
Your time, by the way, will be up at 10 minutes because Councillor McKelvey finished at 5 and you were next. So it'll be up at 10 minutes on the clock.
Through the Mayor, there'll be no reduction. I think as pointed out earlier, when we look at the amount of funds that are available each and every year, we look at those funds and we look at the percentage of those funds that get invested in the work for that given year, and that we have some work to do in terms of improving our success rate is what I'm saying. So the short answer to your question is that there'll be no projects lost as a result of any of the reduction in investment that we have made year after year.
And again, you mentioned the spend, so our spend rate is we'd like it to be higher, of course, and we're going to be working on that.
Yeah, so through the Mayor, I mean, my experience is that the spend rate is usually 80% and above. I think the figure that we reported here earlier today, and again, this is a combination of state of good repair as well as expansion works. I think we're in the order of about 67, 68%. So and it's not to say it's necessarily a direct result of resources that we're bringing to bear to get the work done. Some of it could be related to market, but I don't want to speculate right now. I want us to understand exactly why it is that we're not at a higher rate.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff. Can you help me to understand whether or not, I guess, Social Development and Finance, Mr. Berlinger, the youth equity strategy, is that fully funded as it relates to this budget?
Through the chair, yes, all of the elements in the youth equity strategy are funded with this budget.
So there's been a lot of noise about the fact that it has not and isn't funded. So you're validating that it is, in fact, funded today.
With the added investment in the 2019 recommended budget, we will be addressing the outstanding issues in Toronto Youth Equity Strategy.
Okay, let me just shift now to the youth hubs. There has been proposals that have been brought forward to expand the number of hubs by, I think it's additional 20, and I know that the library the library board has recommended that 2 hubs be added. Are those 2 hubs being added as part of this budget?
Through the chair, yes, they are.
And then can you comment on adding 20 hubs? I would imagine that there's preparation planning that would have to be done as part of that going forward. How would you just simply add 20 hubs as part of putting some funds in place? I mean, is that the appropriate way to address this issue?
Briefing note 23 submitted to the Budget Committee identifies opportunities both in Toronto Public Library and Parks, Forestry and Rec. It also identifies the need to do an overall review of youth spaces to ensure that, in fact, they are meeting the needs they're intended to meet. That being said, any additional investment in Toronto Public Library would be a useful investment. They have a well thought through expansion plan, and I believe could implement up to 5 in 2019.
So you talk a little bit about the work that needs to be done in terms of expanding hubs and so on. Is that work being done now in terms of preparation?
It is as part of the direction from Economic and Community Development Committee at its January 16th meeting to undertake a full, comprehensive, deep review of all youth programs and services.
Right. Can you then help me to understand, with respect to the poverty reduction strategy, this budget, this year's base budget, are we addressing the financial requirement that's needed to help with our program in terms of dealing with the strategy?
The recommended budget provides for the continued implementation of the key directions in the first term plan of the poverty reduction strategy. So yes, that being said, there will be a new term plan coming forward to council this year.
How do we measure and how do we define success as it relates to, I'll even go back to the youth equity strategy and also the hubs and then poverty reduction. I mean, I understand that, quite frankly, if we're able to help a lot of people and moving them out of poverty, but how do you define success? And I do have one other question for EMS.
The focus of evaluation is on each initiative under a strategy. So we would look at, for example, transit fare equity, do a deep evaluation of that. Overall, on poverty reduction, we are working on the evaluation framework. It is a challenge because the city does not control the key levers that add to poverty. So if there is an Ontario or Canada decision that in fact adds to poverty, we're responding to it. We don't control it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Berlinger. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. McCarrican, the acting chief. And I'm not sure why you're not the chief. You're just acting. So, but by the way, you're doing an amazing job, if I can say. So thank you very much for your tour on last Monday. During the tour, we had some discussions in terms of the demand, the growth level in terms of emergency calls and preparation and so on. And I gather that there's not enough staffing to address all of that. And I could be wrong, but do you have a plan to deal with this in terms of the demand that's being made of you and your team?
Through the chair, yeah, over the last 10 years.
Is your mic on? Because I can't hear you.
Yep. Through the last 10 years, we've experienced a 4% increase in emergency call, and the growth is based on our drivers are an aging and growing population in the city, and also servicing a more of a marginalized community as well. So our plan is based on a couple of components. We've really focused on some specialized program like community paramedics to focus on folks that call us frequently, and we've seen a lot of process improvement with those folks, but also reductions in frequent calls to EMS and significant impact on that group. In addition to that, we've moved forward with a multifunction station plan that helps deal with efficiencies and effectiveness of actual service delivery for the paramedics, and as well as we are currently putting together a multi-year staffing plan that will help address the pressures in EMS, then we'll actually identify investment that's required for our service delivery.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Thank you, Chief. Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, Mayor Tory. Through you to the City Manager. I wanted to start with asking about you mentioned the Moody rating. I guess it's AA1. There was a disclaimer, I understand, from what I read, that they do have some concerns about our state of good repair backlog over the next 10-odd years. So your presentation today, it's roughly just over $7 billion. By 2028, it's going to be about $9.5 billion. The other slide I saw, our capital investment over the next 10 years is about $40 billion.
So is that ratio, is that acceptable to Moody's? Is that something that it's on par, on the same level as peer municipalities in Canada that they would be rating?
So through the mayor, so I can't obviously speak for Moody's in terms of what, if any, that information would change their rating. But what I can say is that municipalities, I mean, across this country, all experience, budget challenges, and all municipalities will have a certain percentage of its infrastructure that are, as we would say here, below the line. So the ratio, is our ratio fundamentally better or worse than other municipalities? I can't really speak to that. My only comment, though, I think is important to make is that as we mature in our asset management work, I do believe that the numbers will grow, and I do believe that our backlog is, we're going to have to keep our eye on it, as we try to come up with a 10-year capital program. So it does speak to, I think, a challenge that we have now, but I do expect that challenge to grow. How that gets reported in terms of a credit rating agency such as Moody's, again, I'm not going to predict one way or another whether it be positive or negative.
Okay. And then our unmet capital needs for the next 15 years are $13.5 billion. That doesn't include our capital improvement plan, TTC expansion. There's a list here. Do we have a value? Like, I don't see Smart Track mentioned here. Is there a value on what that is?
I'm just going to ask Josie to comment on that.
So through you, Mr. Chair, Smart Track is fully funded, so it's in the 10-year capital plan. So it would not form part of the unmet needs. That's about $3.5 billion at the moment.
Okay. But do we have a total value on this page of what the
for transit expansion?
Page 44?
So the total that I was giving you reflected the briefing note that we submitted, which was the $13.5 billion, excluding these items, because we'll be coming forward with refined estimates in a matter of a month on the transit expansion piece.
But we don't have a value or projected value of what the unexpected unmet capital needs over the next 15 years are going to be.
$13.5 billion, which is outlined in the briefing note, yes.
But there's some that are excluded.
Some that are excluded. So
we don't have a value of the excluded.
No, not at this time.
Okay. All right. And then one of the questions I had around recreation programming, this is we have funding in place for 7,500 spots in 2019, but that's considerably less than what we approved at council in 2017, I believe.
So through the chair, that's correct. We have funding in place for 7,500 spots to expand the growth plan in 2019, and we've phased the original council plan of 60,000 spots over 5 years rather than over 3 years. Noting that the 7,500 spaces are brand new spaces, but we've also added approximately 11,000 new spaces as a result of opening new facilities this year, which weren't accounted for in the original growth strategy.
Okay. All right. And then I also wanted to ask about Toronto Public Library, our open hours program. We have an approved board program for increasing the open hours, but in the briefing note, so we're not increasing any open hours this year, and it talks in the briefing note about fiscal challenges. I'm trying to understand where we're going with that, with the open hours policy.
Right. I'm just trying to see whether or not we have anyone represented from the library here. I don't see anyone. So I'm not going to attempt to answer that question specifically without having proper information. So
okay, maybe I could get that by Thursday?
You can get that by Thursday.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Mayor Tory.
Councillor Ainsley, thank you. Other members of the committee, Councillor Pasternak and then Councillor Nunziata.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Tory. I'd like to focus for a second on winter operations. It's certainly a topic that's been brought up in recent weeks due to the extreme weather situations we've had. Now, I'm looking at the funding over the years. It seems to be going up despite conventional wisdom that it's not enough. In fact, since Mayor Tory arrived at City Hall, I see a steady increase totaling $9.5 million. Can you just sort of summarize where we've been going with that on an annual basis? I mean, I see us at about 87.45 million this year, or in the current budget, and that's at an end of a steady multi-year increases. Is that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. I think the budgeted amount this year, projected year end of 87.45 million, will probably be challenged in the same way that we were if you head back to 2008 when we had a significant series of significant snow events just like we did this year. We have been taking a good hard look at the 3-year actuals of our winter maintenance budget, and while it has been increasing to manage our services, we've also been managing it according to the weather, which has been reasonably mild in the last few years. So this year, the budget of 87.45 million will be somewhat challenged by the fact that we've just done some snow removal, but we're trying to get those costs as close to the budgeted amount as possible, and we'll have a lot more information on that in the coming weeks.
Now, I understand that that's a blended cost of in-house costs and contracted costs. I have an older report that seems to show about 75% is outsourced, is to third-party subcontractors.
Through you, I believe it's higher than that. I believe the number is closer to 90% of contracted services.
So have we been growing our outsourcing and shrinking our in-house, or it's been pretty steady over the years?
My understanding is that there was a reduction in in-house crews back around 2012, but this is the first year actually in some time that we've added some additional in-house capacity through our Quick Clear program. So we actually have added some in-house crews this year for the first time in some time.
So I understand a review is taking place. There's the mayor's letter of February the 5th, and the ombudsman has been making noises that she's going to be keeping an eye on it as well. Now, in the mayor's letter, he concludes by saying we're hoping to see the results of this review in the near future. What would you describe as the near future?
We're looking to have preliminary results back by May of this year. We want to be able to take whatever near-term actions we can through the 2020 snow season.
And I have no doubt we'll probably be debating it on the hottest day of the year. But it's not just a money issue. It's policy and confusion. Many of the complaints that come in to our office are from people who are unaware what each group's responsibility are for snow clearing. We get complaints from business and property owners, or people who are complaining about businesses and property owners, condo buildings, multi-use residential, not clearing, not living up to their obligations on de-icing and clearing. Do we have, or included in your review, do we have the resources to enforce current city policy when it comes to making these private property owners clear up and make it safe for their residents and owners?
Through you, we do. I also think it's important to note that our communications efforts more broadly and comprehensively back out to the community are really critical, and that's going to be a key focus of this review as well. So before we go down an enforcement path, which we do have resources to do, we want to make sure that we're giving people adequate and comprehensive notice about their responsibilities, as well as what our program does and does not cover.
Would you say that it's unlikely that residents of a rental building or a condo building know that it's obligation of the owners or managers of that building to clear the sidewalks in front of their house? And in fact, many call our office wondering when the city's going to clear off the roads. Is it a communication problem, or is it an enforcement problem?
I think that it's probably a little bit of both, but I think we have a good ways to go in terms of expanding and improving our communications, as well as making sure that that communication happens through all the different tiers. So with residents directly, whether they're in rental or ownership properties, and then as well with the managers. I do also think that a critical piece of this review is going to look at harmonizing service citywide, and so some of that confusion has to do with the fact that there are different levels of service depending on the geometry and geography of the streets, and that go back as far as amalgamation. So we're going to take another look at that as well to try to get to harmonized service.
We're currently plowing about 6,000 kilometers of sidewalks, and the total kilometers of sidewalks is 7,900. Is your inclination to add the extra 1,900 kilometers of sidewalk?
That's a key focus of this review, is to look at the sidewalks in the downtown mostly, where space issues and other constraints have made it very challenging to do mechanical clearing in the past, but that's going to be a critical focus of this review, as the mayor's letter indicated.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Pasternak. Councillor Nunziata.
Yes, just on the comment on your the previous question on enforcement. So, are you saying that we don't have enforcement now on people that don't clear the sidewalk or plow the snow onto the road? There's no enforcement at all?
No, there is enforcement. It's on a complaint basis, and often by the time the bylaw officers get out there to do the enforcement,
it's all melted.
Or people have addressed it.
Well, this is these are the complaints I'm getting. So really, if they call you and we don't get there for 2 or 3 days later, it's all melted, so there's no charges, correct?
Or they get a warning and they fix it before any charges have been laid. I believe, I'm trying to remember a spreadsheet from just earlier in this week, I believe that there have been some charges that have been laid upon people in, I don't remember which district it is, Councillor, but certainly our enforcement folks are out there and they're following up on complaints as they get them. I would say it is not proactive enforcement, it's complaint-based.
Yeah, so it's not proactive. I hope the charges that were laid in my ward. Your budget for 87 million, does that include the potholes, filling in the potholes? Is that part of that budget?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's a separate maintenance budget.
Okay. So when it comes to potholes, just a question on what the process is for potholes. Other than people calling 311, which we communicate that, or residents call in, or the councillor's office calls in. Other than that, do we have a system in place where we're actually driving around to all the streets and filling in the potholes without waiting for a complaint? Because we have thousands out there, unless we complain, they're not being filled in. So what is the process?
Through you, there's 3 things I want to draw your attention to. One is, as you described, service requests. People can call in and request a pothole be filled. We get lots of those. We have maintenance patrollers in each district who are out constantly, especially in the winter season, looking for potholes. Sometimes they fill them. Sometimes they pass those requests on to others in the crew who do that work of filling. And then, as the city manager mentioned, we also did an update of our asset management program, where we have a lot more specific pavement information. And so from last year, we also utilized that information to be more proactive about getting those filled. As you know, with a season like we've had this year, with wild swings in temperature, the potholes are continuing to be a problem. We've done 1 blitz already, and we'll continue to do more over the weekends as the snow gets gone.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's important that we're proactive than reactive. So thank you to that. So to shelter, how's it? Yeah. So just a couple questions. Do you have adequate funds to secure properties for new shelters?
Through the chair, yes, we do.
Okay. And the central intake call center is new since the last budget was approved. Is that correct?
The central intake.
Your mic is not on. Sorry
about that.
Okay.
Through the chair, yes, we've done a complete review of central intake, added new technology, completely redid the processes, some staffing changes, and it's operating very efficiently and effectively at the moment.
So how has it improved the process for those looking for emergency shelter beds? If you could just give us.
So through the use of technology and new processes, we're able to answer the calls quicker and refer people to appropriate shelters or respite services immediately. There were very long wait times a year ago, and we've reduced those times down to a very low percentage within what would be considered acceptable call center norms.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Nunziata. Other councillors on the committee, Councillor Deputy Mayor Barlow.
Thank you. When we approved the Housing Now plan, there was a request to have a $20 million allocation in order to implement that plan. Does the budget now confirm that the money has been fully allocated for us to implement?
Through the mayor, yes, it does.
Okay. With regards to shelters and housing, I was looking at some of the briefing notes that you passed you distributed, and there has been an increase of people that have been ousted through SSHA. So from 2014, where you housed, people were discharged from the shelters to permanent housing, you had about 4,300, and in 2018, almost 8,000. Is there any way that we're keeping track of these are like one-timers? Like, are people being housed successfully?
Through the chair, absolutely. People are being housed successfully. The very significant increase would be related to the number of families that we've been working with over the past 18 months or so. And so those are absolutely people successfully housed in permanent housing.
And what has been the biggest support that has caused this increase? Is there a specific program that you think is working well? Is there?
Through the chair, it would be a combination of working with outside providers, hard work of city staff. The use of housing allowances has been very helpful. So it's a number of things. Like most challenges, it's usually more than one thing that contribute to success.
Okay. With regards to TCHC, so is it I just want to confirm that we're actually, for a second year in a row, are actually going to be opening up units versus closing up units with the current budget in front of us. Is that correct?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct.
Okay. And so this was, as per council direction, there was a interim financial plan for the last 2 years. And are we seeing a new plan coming forward that addresses the capital and operating issues of TCHC?
Through the chair, yes. Staff will be coming forward with a funding strategy, a revised funding formula for TCHC.
And when are we expecting that?
Within Q2 of this year, we anticipate that'll come forward in the summer.
So it'll be integrated in the budget preparation for next year?
The timing will allow for any implications to be built into the 2020 budget.
Okay. And there's a big request on the capital side, like there's a request for other orders of government, but there's also a request for the city. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's two components. One is the annual ongoing state of good repair cost, approximately $160 million a year. The other is the outstanding backlog state of good repair, and it will likely require investments from both to achieve that.
So we need investments from both, from the other orders of government and from the city to continue in the path that we've been up to now.
That's correct. The focus on the city side has to ensure that the capacity for the annual SOGR is accounted for and looking to for assistance with the backlog.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Bailao. Other members of the committee wishing to ask questions? Okay, I just have a couple if I can. I'll start the clock there. To members of our financial staff, either the CFO or our staff budgets, are the percentage, if you could for me, of the of the percentage increase in children's services in this budget.
Sorry, just checking my spreadsheet to make sure that I give you the accurate answer. Children's services has increased 4.5% over 2018.
The percentage increase in the city subsidy to the TTC, conventional and Wheel-Trans together, percentage increase.
I'm doing my mental math, it would be 1.9% combined.
It's actually, okay. Could you just check that again for me? We're not going to be able to go through this list at this rate of speed. It's actually 3.0%, I believe.
Oh, overall, yes, sorry.
Yes, that's what I said. Wheel-Trans and TTC together.
Thank you.
3.0. The percentage and dollar increase, the percentage increase for the paramedics this year.
That would be 5.6%.
The percentage increase for Toronto Public Libraries in this budget.
2.9%,
The percentage increase for the Toronto Police Services in the budget.
3.0,
The dollar amount of the new investment being made in poverty reduction.
For new services, net 9.526 million.
Is the poverty reduction budget fully funded for 2019?
Based on the existing term plan, yes, it is.
All right, my next questions are for the representative of the TTC. Does the budget this year help speed up the relief line project by 2 years?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, it does. There was an added $325 million in the capital program to accomplish that.
All right, can I confirm that the 2-hour transfer across the entire network for the full year is in this budget?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, it is. It was $20.5 million annualized in the budget to accommodate.
All right, and may I confirm that the budget includes funding for 4 additional trains for the full year on Line 1 to assist in rush hour service and 2 trains in the afternoon rush hour?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, it does.
All right, may I also confirm with you that more buses in service on 23 bus routes in 27 different periods of operation and peak periods are included in the budget for 2019?
Yes, sir, they are.
May I confirm as well that more buses and services on 26 bus routes in 55 periods of operation in off-peak periods, in other words, not in rush hour, are included in this year's budget?
I don't have those exact numbers committed to memory, but that sounds very close or spot on, Mr. Mayor.
They're committed to my memory, but thank you very much for that. May I confirm with you, and this is contrary to the propaganda that's out there, and that's an editorial comment, you don't have to pay attention to that, but that for the TTC only, that's leaving Wheel-Trans out, that in fact, contrary to what's said over and over again, that the reliance on the fare box has actually gone, and I'll mention during the period of time that I've been mayor, from 72% in 2015 to 67.5% on this budget, taking into account the fare increase that is going to take effect in 2019. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, those numbers are spot on.
Can I just make sure we have this right? That for the TTC, the reliance on the fare box is 72% in 2015 when I became the mayor, and today in this budget, after the fare increase that has taken place, it is to be at 67.5% in 2019.
Yes, those numbers are correct.
All right, those are the questions I had for the TTC. I thank you very much. Now, where are we here? Toronto Community Housing. Is there somebody here from Toronto Community Housing or that can answer on their behalf? All right. Can I just confirm that, again, there seems to be these notions out there that nothing is being done for Toronto Community Housing this year and there's nothing being allocated. Can I confirm that there is a $243 million city subsidy for the operations of the Toronto Community Housing Corporation in the budget 2019?
Yes, that's correct.
And may I confirm as well that there is a $173 million capital contribution, most of it dedicated to the repairs, the ongoing challenge of repairs, and that's the city's contribution, $173 million in the 2019 budget.
Yes, that's correct.
I think that probably looks after my questions, and I'd used up, I had a little delay in my own time where we got the TTC people there, but I'll leave it at that, and thank everybody very much. I'm sure since some of our friends are not here to hear those answers, we'll have to repeat them at the City Council, but that's okay. All right, anybody else who has any questions? Because if not, we can move to speakers on the budget. And so are there any members of visiting the committee who are not members of the Executive Committee wishing to speak? All right, seeing none, then I'll move to members of the Executive Committee wishing to speak, starting with Councillor Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a number of motions that I would like to move, please, if we can put them up. First one is shelter support and housing, that the budget be increased with regard to $102,600 for the 76 city-funded shelters, drop-ins, and respite centers with funding to purchase menstrual products for their clients and program users. The second one is with regard to economic development and culture operating budget, that the Budget Committee recommend operating Budget for economic and development culture be decreased by $150,000 net, and you put it into the, this is for a street art investment. The next one is investments in culture, is for the General Manager Economic Development Culture to consult with the community on priorities for further investment in the arts, heritage, and creative industries, and report back through 2020. The next one is a Parks, Forestry, Recreation capital budget. I won't read it all. It's a section 42 for Sergeant Ryan Russell Parquet Playground upgrade. And I believe the last one is strengthening Toronto's ability to attract and host major events through the Toronto Significant Events Investment Program. That funding is awarded over 3 years of $750,000, which is fully funded from the Special Events Reserve Fund to the items that are listed below that. First of all, I think you'll have to do.
Oh, sorry. Well, all right. We'll allow you. I think that would have taken about 1 minute and 45 seconds. Okay. What did it say? 7. I finished at 5, so it said 7:15. So we'll allow you 3 minutes and 15 seconds. Thank you.
First of all, I too want to thank staff for their incredible amount of work that has gone into this budget. Understanding it is an election year budget. We as a council do not have the oversight that we normally do. So they have actually presented and done a vast majority of the work. So I just want to congratulate everyone, as the mayor has, on staff on what they have done. I also want to thank my budget committee members, along with anybody else who came through the budget process over the last couple of weeks, and also the public. We did reach out to the public, that they're always an important partner with regard to what we're doing, and I just wanted to thank them. I've been doing, this is my 5th budget, and I could probably say the same thing every year, that every year is a tough budget, and we can have reasons for that, and they're all true. But this year in particular, and when I'm looking at the budgets that I've been involved in, has probably been a little tougher than others. And reason being is because it's really been defined by a shortfall in the municipal land transfer tax. Last 4 years, it's been increasing. This year it actually decreased. And again, thanking city staff, when they saw this shortfall, they have done an incredible amount to be able to bring us a balanced budget today. And this budget does protect city services. It increases. There are new investments in this budget. There's over $50 million of new investments actually in this budget. But we continue, and the mayor brought up a number of points when he asked this question. When you're looking at the continued investments that are happening throughout this budget, you're looking at the TTC, and the mayor did a lot. When you're looking at police, over 800 FTEs are being put into this year's budget. We have new police officers, we have special constables. When you're looking at the investments in our libraries, and we are increasing our investment in the libraries. Toronto Community Housing, we are opening up new units. We are actually investing in capital dollars, considerable capital dollars. We are keeping up with our commitments. Poverty reduction, our youth equity strategy, Housing Now, Transform TO, the arts. And I'm hearing the rhetoric myself, and everyone's been hearing this rhetoric and the propaganda that's been happening over the last couple of weeks. We are investing in the city. But what we're doing is being able to invest in our city, but at the same time keeping taxes affordable for the residents of this city. They spoke loud and clear during the election. I heard it at doors I was knocking on. The mayor was elected on a mandate citywide, not only the mayor, but one of his prominent people running against him, on keeping taxes low, and we have been able to achieve that in this budget. There are no double-digit property tax increases. Again, more of the propaganda that I've been hearing as recently as Friday. We need to increase taxes. We need to increase taxes. I don't prescribe to that ideology at all. I prescribe to what we have been doing consistently over the last 5 years, keeping taxes low, but at the same time doing the important investments that the residents of this city expect. There's been some tough choices. Absolutely, there have been some tough choices. And we have not been able to do everything we want, but we have been able to do enough to ensure that we have been keeping those proper kind of investments.
I'll ask you to wrap up.
And just very quickly, my last comment was with regard, and I know it was already mentioned, Moody's. Last week maintained the city's AA1 credit rating and applauded Toronto's sound governance and prudent fiscal planning. So on that alone, I think we've been doing an incredible job. We'll continue doing the incredible job that is expected of us. Thank you.
Thanks to Councillor Crawford. We had next Councillor Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I have a motion. I just ask staff to put that on the screen. And while they're doing that, I too want to thank the city manager, all the staff, chair of the budget committee, and members of the budget committee. Additionally, the public as well for their contribution and their input. Mr. Mayor, I place this motion and I ask the acting Chief of EMS the question around the increase with respect to the growth in the calls and so on. I had the pleasure of actually spending some 2 hours up at the head office last week, and I was totally amazed with respect to the level of organization, the governing principle in terms of how things are done there, and the expectation that they have in providing this great level of service. And I suspect it's other agencies as well. But speaking to EMS, you know, when I think about if my mother needed the service, what would happen, or any of our families and so on. And I can say that the structure of that organization is such that I wouldn't think twice, obviously, in terms of, you know, the service responding to a call for any members of the public and so on. Of course, it's really important in terms of understanding what's happening. So the calls are increasing, and yes, there is a need for more you know, people to be working in the organization. But it has to be done in a planned way, in an organized way. Mr. McCracken, when I spoke with him and his team, it seems to me that they've got that those foundation and those principle in place, and bringing that forward in a timely way that's appropriate. And so I'm asking for a report back in 2019 in order to ensure that for the 2020 budget, we can build in as part of the multi-year hiring that he spoke about when he addressed us here this morning. And so we can address this particular need because of the growing demand in terms of the growth in emergency calls and so on. And I just want to finally thank those men and women who work in this area. Our emergency responders are terrific, and they work extremely hard, and I was really impressed with what I saw at EMS and so on. Mr. Mayor, the questions you asked related to the funding in this particular budget, and this, by the way, is my 16th budget, and I have never seen one that was actually ever easy. I've seen them actually more contentious, and so I want to congratulate you for the leadership role that you played with respect to advancing the discussion with the city manager, the staff, in order to bring forward a budget that addresses the very needs of the services that are required for the city. And at the same time, wanting to keep property taxes at a level that's affordable for Torontonians. I have in my community people who are doing 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. In fact, we've discovered recently that there are a number of people in the community, and I suspect my community is not alone, where people actually have full-time jobs and are relying on food banks just to actually make ends meet. And so the need to ensure that we keep property taxes at a level that allows us to provide all of the different services that are needed to ensure that our residents and the service level are maintained. And we've heard through the questions you've asked of the staff about, you know, the increases and so on. And I think the fundamental one that's really was glaring to me was about the TTC in terms of the fare, the reduction. I think that's extremely important, and I hope that is recognized, quite frankly, because the traditional thing is that everyone complains that, you know, we want better service, but we actually don't really want to pay for it. And I don't think that's possible to provide better service without actually paying for it. And I also think that through the city manager's effort to, and certainly yours, Mr. Mayor, in terms of, you know, wanting to ensure that not only the federal government, but the provincial government as well, make greater contribution to help us, which is this engine of this country, not just of this province, to make things work. And so if we're not well, the other parts of this country will not be well. So it's really important for the federal government to recognize the needs and to help us. And you know, the tools that we have are rather limited. The bulk of it is property taxes. And we know that many of our residents already stretch with respect to their ability to make ends meet. I heard just last week, most Canadians are only $200 away from bankruptcy, and we have to keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Thompson. Councillor Pasternak.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a technical motion drafted by our very capable staff regarding parkland acquisition. We can go on the screen. I won't be speaking to it, but it's something I've been asked to move today.
The staff were just asking me to stand that, maybe stand you down. Is it in the hands of the staff?
Well, they don't have it.
I don't think so. So they can't put it up.
Okay, so just give it to them. And then just
But if you just give it to them, yes, exactly. Do we want to just hold for a minute and then we can make sure that can be put up? And maybe, did I hear that Deputy Mayor Barlow had her hand up or not? Okay. Well, I'm not trying to, why don't we we'll put you on hold with only 30 seconds gone, Councillor Pasternak, and then go over to Deputy Mayor Barlow, and then we'll. So.
And I do have a motion that I'm going to ask my colleagues at Executive to support. I think I'll try to save most of my comments to Council, but I want to touch on 2 or 3 things here. And the first one is our famous snow services that we've all been grappling with, and I want to thank the Mayor. Oh, before I do that, let me thank staff and the Chief the budget chief for all the work that they've put in to put this budget together. It's never easy, so thanks to everybody, all the staff. But I want to thank the Mayor to call for a review of the snow services. Everybody that has been working on trying to understand how to deliver services better in our city. There's clearly something that didn't go right this season. I am happy that we're reviewing everything from the harmonization of the services. Us downtown councillors for a long time, I think every budget cycle that I've been here, complain about our sidewalks not being clean and the lack of equity that this represents in the city. I think that we have to review the contracts, the service levels, but we also have to deliver who's delivering those services. And I think that we need to really look at this review with open minds, open eyes, and see who's going to best do the service at the most efficient and effective way. I think that we need to be open to partner with the private sector and contractors, with our labor partners, and see who can deliver those services. At the end of the day, the residents of Toronto want us to look for ways to deliver the services in the most effective and efficient way. And for us to truly come to them and say, we believe that this is the way that we do it, we have to look everywhere and at all options and put all options on the table. That's what I'm asking, and that's why I'm putting this motion here today, is that we truly look at every possible option, the pros and the cons of every option, and be transparent with Torontonians when we come to the conclusions that we come, and that, it's not a bias or political towards one way or the other. The other thing I would like to talk about is obviously TCHC and the housing. I'm happy to see the full allocation of the $20 million. We are putting up the land, we are putting the incentives. I mean, when we put all this together, these are millions and millions of dollars that we're going to be talking about. As the land evaluation comes through, which I'm hearing it could be as much as $500 million, plus, over $280 million that we're doing in incentives through waive development charges. These are all big numbers, but we need to understand that we need money, we need staff to put together these programs to make sure that they work efficiently, and I'm happy to see that we're giving the resources to our team to make sure that this program is going to hit the ground running, that we're going to be putting these 11 sites out in the market as soon as possible, that we're going to be working with our nonprofit housing sector to make sure that this not only brings more housing, rental housing, but it's also an opportunity to strengthen our nonprofit sector here in the city. The other thing, the other thing is Toronto community housing. It's been difficult capital plan that we have been developing. We, in the last 2 years, have finally been opening units instead of closing units. Last year, there were 140 units out of the ones that were closed that were open. This year, with this budget, we're going to open 109 units. This is the pattern that the city should be going. We need to build more housing. We need to maintain the stock that we have. And for that, we continue to call on our partners, and we're hopeful that you know, they'll come through. But we've also stepped up in a very, very important way. Not only have we increased significantly the operating budget of TCHC, the $32 million that was put in the operating budget in 2017 is now part of their base budget. But we've also done an important step in acknowledging that this is not a corporation on the side that used to be provincial and that we don't have a responsibility. This administration has taken a clear step forward in saying, this is going to be part of our responsibility. We're going to be working with the other orders of government to make sure that the 58,000 units that are owned by Toronto Community Housing are units that are safe to live, that are clean, and that are in good conditions for the people of the 110,000 people that live at Toronto Community Housing. So even though that I know certain people were trying to make it seem that there was no plan, the plan wasn't. This was Council's direction that all approved. There was a 2-year interim plan that was fulfilled, and I'm looking forward to having the financial formula, funding formula, the new funding formula coming through in Q2 and being part of the next budget to ensure that this is the trajectory that we continue.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Barlow. Councillor Pasternak, I think we're ready to come back to you if you're ready to have us come back to you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe the clerk has the motion now. As I mentioned earlier, it's a technical motion for parkland acquisition, moving funds around, a normal process, but I'm going to speak to winter operations. Before I do, though, I would like to join the chorus of thanks to our finance staff, our budget staff, as well as the budget committee and the budget chief. I was on the budget committee for 4 years. It is an enormous amount of work. It's slightly different during an election year where staff take the load, but there's still political oversight and an awful lot of work from both the mayor's office and Councillor Crawford's office. And I think what we have before us is a very responsible document, maintaining city services, increasing where we can, keeping taxes at the rate of inflation, making sure that seniors and young families are not pushed out of their homes by unreasonable tax increases advocated by some on council. When it comes to winter operations, if we look at the time, the numbers when Mayor Tory arrived at City Hall, they were on the decrease. And over this period of time, they've increased by about $10 million. And we have a big city. We have 6,000 kilometers of sidewalk that we're clearing of the 7,900 that are out there. We have 9,500 streets, and we have about 5,600 kilometers of streets. And it's a mammoth operation. 90% of it is done by third-party subcontractors, and about 10% by city staff. So there are some who believe that the more money you throw at it, the better it will become. But based on certainly the complaints that many of us are receiving through our offices, through 311, and through the Ombudsman's office, what is breaking down in many cases is policy and communication, and making sure that private rental buildings know the responsibilities to clear the sidewalks and pathways that lead to and from their building, to make sure retail operators and owners of small plazas properly clear their area, and make sure that parking spaces, steps, ramps, and landings are also cleared within 24 hours. We do have some enforcement available, but we have to look at more. In addition, we have to look at what is happening with private home clearing services. I think everyone has seen the movement of snow from driveways and walkways onto our streets, which of course is illegal. And I realize it's very hard to enforce these measures at 3 in the morning when many of these small companies are out there clearing sidewalks and roads. Other complaints that are coming across my desk regard the local school. with a misconception that the city is responsible for clearing the local school. Of course, we have to work with our school boards to make sure that they understand the rules and they clear the snow on a timely basis so that morning drop-offs are safe and efficient, and that kids and parents dropping off are not at risk. I have one example, I think, that is kind of a microcosm of the problem that we face, is from a constituent who went to the Art Gallery of Ontario at the time of one of the storms or just afterwards. They walked, there was some construction work as well. They started off in a green pea parking lot, which was improperly cleared, and I'm not trying to pick on anyone. And then they made their way from the parking lot, I think, across a city sidewalk and then onto the AGO sidewalk area, which he describes as treacherous. So here's a situation in which you have 3 jurisdictions within a 2-3 minute walk where there's confusion over who's responsible for clearing what their timely obligations are, and making sure that they have the resources and commitment to make it safe for everybody. So I think that's a lot of the challenge we're facing. We have to make it clear to residents of multi-unit residential towers that their management is responsible for clearing, and we have to make it clear to condominium owners as well that their management is responsible for clearing the sidewalks in front of the building and the parking lot, as well as the side pathways. And of course, if you visit any plaza in the aftermath of a storm, the snow clearing is often subpar, and we have to work with those retail outlets to make sure they live up to their obligations as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor Pasternak. Yes, Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Just a point of order, Mr. Mayor. I just wonder if I could move a motion to complete the agenda. We have a few more speakers, and it's almost 25 after.
I was just going to ask for one, and so thank you for moving that. And all those in favor of extending the meeting to complete the agenda through the lunch time that's normally provided for, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Other speakers? No? Anybody else? Because Councillor Nunziata, for sure. Thank you.
My light won't stay on. Oh, okay. Is it on? Okay. Just briefly, as a member of the Budget Committee, as the Chair, Councillor Crawford, mentioned, we did have a number of public meetings throughout the city, and there were quite a few residents that came out and made deputations. I think we had a number of meetings with the Budget Committee, and I believe that the budget that we have is a fair budget, and that we have we haven't reduced services at all in the budget. As a matter of fact, we've increased services in some departments. And so I do support the budget that we have before us. We haven't even approved the budget, and I'm getting calls from constituents asking me why I increased the property tax. We haven't even balanced the budget yet. So I can tell you that these members of council, and they're not here now, but every year for all the budgets I've sat through since amalgamation, is that we have never had 100% of members of council that come out and say we've got an amazing budget and we're all in support of it. Every year it's the same opposition to the budget, where there are some members of council that want to increase it, increase services, they want to increase the property tax, and it's the same every year. But I don't believe that they're speaking on behalf of the residents of Toronto, because I have not heard that. If anything, I've heard from residents they can't afford to pay their property tax, and they don't want us to increase it any higher. So I will support the budget that we have before us. I do support Councillor Bylaw. You mentioned the snow removal, and to look at that, because I'm sure we all did, all members of council received so many calls and complaints on the snow removal, sidewalks, people throwing snow on the road and not being plowed within a few days. So I think that was a big issue this year, and I don't know why, because it's never happened that way before, so I don't know why. So I'm interested in getting that review to find out what went wrong and correct it for the future. So that's, and Councillor Thompson, I do support your motion as well, and all the motions that Councillor Crawford has brought forward. And Toronto Housing, I just comment on Toronto Housing that with our huge backlog that we have at Toronto Housing, but every year we, I know we're increasing the budget, we're putting millions of dollars back in the budget. What I would like to see though from Toronto Housing is a list of all the work that they've done in these buildings, because sometimes what we do get is complaints from tenants saying work hasn't been done. It would be, I think it would help the local councillors knowing the investments that have been made in their individual buildings, and then in fact the work has been done. So we as councillors know exactly improvements that they made within their ward. That I would like to see in the future. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I will be supporting the budget.
Thank you, Councillor Nunziata. Any other speakers? Okay, well, if I can just reset the clock and say a brief word. First of all, I've indicated my thanks, my very genuine and sincere thanks to staff, council members, staff in my own office, staff in Councillor Crawford's office for all of the hard work that's been done over a lengthy period of time. You know, the commentary on budgets, and this is sort of along the lines of what Councillor Nunziata was just saying, doesn't change, and I'm not complaining about that. I'm just commenting on it. On the one hand, you have those who are saying we're spending too much. In fact, there are those who question the very legitimacy of initiatives like poverty reduction and some of the initiatives we undertake as a caring city to shelter people, for example. And I don't know that they are people who I think would even say, well, too bad if there are people who happen to be homeless, and whether they're refugees or not, we should just say too bad for you. Or too bad for people who are struggling, who have programs for the young people in the city and the families. And I don't accept that point of view. I do think, as we're doing right now with respect to youth programs, we have an obligation, and we're going to get a full report back on the effectiveness of those programs. But the notion that this is a bad investment in the city or an investment we should do away with is just not an acceptable notion for me, and it's also not an acceptable notion for the vast majority of people who live in the City of Toronto. But those people would say that we're spending too much on those kinds of things, and that these programs, which provide for the social and economic well-being of people who are often more vulnerable, are things that are excessive expenditures and should be cut. And so you hear that commentary, and then of course you hear, on the other hand, from those who say that we're spending nowhere near enough and that we should dramatically increase. In fact, last week there was one member of council, who I'm sure we'll hear from during the budget debate at council, who endorsed the notion of taking property taxes up 20% over the next few years. That very same councillor had talked earlier on about the fact that a 30% increase wasn't out of the realm of possibility in his mind. And I would say that it's out of the realm of possibility wherever it may be in his mind. It's out of the realm of possibility for the people of the City of Toronto, who would say that they want us to do exactly what this budget does. It protects services. It makes, albeit modest, but it makes modest investments in increasing and improving those services. And we went through a list of the areas where we've made investments to improve services, notwithstanding the fact that it was a very tough budget year because of the falling short of the land transfer tax revenues. And it does all of that while at the same time having a property tax increase at the rate of inflation. And I will say, I did go out during the campaign, as we all did, but I campaigned in particular. I was the only one that campaigned across the city, and my principal competitor campaigned on exactly the same platform with regard to property taxes, which was to maintain increases at or below the rate of inflation. And the fact is that between the two of us, I think we got about 90% of the vote. I got 64%, and in every ward in the city got a majority of the votes. That people, and I'm not saying they voted solely on that basis, but they were well aware, as a result of the discussion that took place, of what the position was. I believe that my job, the budget chief's job, the city council's job, in fact, is to achieve a balance between those two poles that I was making reference to. Those who would say they question the legitimacy, I think, sometimes of government itself and of the fact that we exist to make sure we look after people who are vulnerable and to give them an opportunity and a decent life in a city that is admired around the world for the quality of life, and those who would say, let's just spend and tax no matter what the numbers are and no matter what the impact that has on the affordability of the city. And so the job of achieving the balance was a job of making sure we protected services, made additional investments in priority areas like transit, like social equity and youth equity initiatives, like police and community safety, like housing, and we heard all the numbers recited, and continues the sound financial management. And I'm so glad a couple of people made reference to the credit rating agency. These are tough, objective people who will not hesitate for a second if they think the city is not being well run financially. And I don't have the report here to quote them, but they said the city was well run and well managed financially, and that is something we're continuing to do with this budget. And I think the other thing is that the property tax increase that is here recognizes the affordability challenge of people in Toronto and some of the challenges they have in their lives by constraining it as opposed to talking about 20% property tax increases. I will just conclude by saying that this question of balance has come up in different ways, questions of the city manager. I have probably been involved in more budgets through business, law, nonprofit organizations, and of course here in government than certainly as many as anybody else. And I will say without exception, every single one of those is based on projections and assumptions. It's a budget that is put in place at the beginning of the year, and it does the best job you possibly can, as our staff have done, estimating revenues and expenditures. And so that means, by definition, there are adjustments made, and not one budget I've ever been involved with hasn't made adjustments during the course of the year. But I will say that I think our staff have done an excellent job in that regard, and with respect to the question of the intergovernmental asks that we have out there, especially in the areas of housing, I'll call it refugee shelter and community safety, I rely on the fact we've had some past success with this. I am unrelenting in my efforts to make sure that the governments recognize their responsibility to help us with that, and I'm confident, based on the success that I, with the help of staff and councillors, have had in securing additional funding, that we will be successful in making sure that those funds are in our hands so that we can make sure that we provide the services that we have to provide to people. I think this is a responsible budget that is balanced in its consideration of affordability versus making sure we provide for those who need help, and I commend it to my colleagues, and I will commend it to our colleagues at the City Council later this week. Thank you for your attention. Now, we have some motions to deal with here, and we'll deal with them in this order, and then Councillor Crawford will take the chair briefly to deal with a couple of the declared conflicts earlier on covered. And we will start with Councillor Crawford's motions, and we'll put them up one at a time. There's motion 1A concerning the Support and Housing Administration operating budget. Ready to call the question? All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. 1B. To do with the Economic Development and Culture and Transportation Services operating budgets. 1B. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. 1C. The investments in culture, motion by Councillor Crawford. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. 1D. Forestry, Parks, Forestry and Recreation capital budget. You can see it there in front of you. All those in favour of Councillor Crawford's motion? Carried. Opposed? I should call for opposed. I saw everybody's hand go up. Opposed? Carried. Thank you. 1E. This is major events through the Major Events Fund investment program. Councillor Crawford's motion. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Next, we move to motion number 2, which is Councillor Thompson's motion concerning paramedic services and a request for a report on multi-year hiring. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Next, we move to Councillor Bailau's motion, which concerned the winter maintenance and some particular examination of who's providing those services. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Then to Councillor Pasternak's motion, number 4, which is concerning PF&R and the Parkland acquisition funds. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. I will now just give that to Councillor Crawford, and I will absent myself from the chair.
Thank you. Next, on the item as amended as it pertains to funds allocated to the provision of telephone, wireless, internet, and television services contained in the Information and Technology Operating Budget, the Toronto Police Services Budget, the Toronto Transit Commission Budget, and the Toronto Community Housing Corporate Budget.
Recorded vote.
Recorded vote. Councillor Ainsley, Councillor Bailao, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Nunziata, Councillor Pasternak, Councillor Thompson. That passes. Mr. Mayor.
go on to Councillor Pasternak, but I can be here for that. Which? Oh,
Am I doing it?
Oh, there's another one to do with news services.
Oh, I didn't. You know what? You're right. I didn't see. Okay, so we have to do another one. On the item as amended as it pertains to funds allocated for the provision of news summary services provided by Canada Newswire in the 2019 Strategic Communications Budget, recorded vote. Councillor Ainsley, Councillor Balau, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Nunziata, Councillor Pasternak, Councillor Thompson. That passes. Now, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. We had one more item to deal with in the context of Councillor Pasternak's declared interest, and that is the item as amended as it pertains to the Toronto Public Library budget. Recorded vote. All those in favour? Councillor Thompson, Councillor Nunziata, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Bailao, Councillor Ainsley, and myself. That carries. So then that brings us, I think, to the final vote on the item as a whole, as amended by all of those motions. And I'll ask for a recorded vote on that if we can. Yes, and Madam Clerk, if you could deal with the recorded vote there.
On the item as amended, all in favor, Mayor Tory, Councillor Crawford, Councillor Bailao, Councillor Ainsley, Councillor Thompson, Councillor Pasternak, Councillor Nunziata. All opposed. That carries unanimously.
I believe that completes our business, and with thanks to the city staff, everybody who was here, and to the members of the committee, and especially to Budget Chief Crawford and to all the staff involved. Thank you very much. Yeah.